The mahogany box my mother unlatched at the center of her country club luncheon was supposed to hold 5 first-class boarding passes to Oslo. She sat at the head of a linen-draped table surrounded by the wealthy women of her Portland Bridge Club. She was smiling the way she always did when she was about to collect her due. I was not there to see it, but the courier I hired watched her lift the brass hinge, expecting VIP tickets to the Nobel Youth Awards ceremony. Instead, the heavy, velvet-lined box held a dense, wet brick of Oregon forest mud. The scent of cold rain and dark earth flooded the table, slicing through the smell of expensive perfume and roasted espresso. Her manicured hands stopped moving. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a tight, bloodless white. It was the look of a woman who had spent 40 years trying to scrub the soil out of our family, only to have it handed back to her on a silver platter in front of her peers. But to understand why I mailed a box of dirt to my own mother, while my 21-year-old twins packed for the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, you have to go back 13 years to the afternoon I finally stopped trying to fit into her pristine world. Welcome back to Sophia Vengeance, where we sit with the quiet women who finally stop apologizing for protecting their peace. I am Hazel. If a family member ever looked at your life and called it a failure just because they could not control it, stay close. Drop a comment and tell me your age and where you are listening from. And be sure to subscribe because this lesson took me a lifetime to learn and one courier delivery to finish. I run an organic farm in the shadow of Mount Hood in Oregon. It is a place where dirt under your fingernails is a receipt for an honest day of work. I wake up before the sun. I know the exact pH of my soil, and I know the sound the wind makes when it drops down the mountain before a storm. My mother Victoria lives in a different reality. She lives in a sterile, high society bubble in a wealthy Portland suburb where appearances are currency and reputation is everything. Her house has white carpets and furniture nobody is allowed to sit on. The tension that ended with that mahogany box started on a Tuesday afternoon when my twins, Leo and Maya, were 8 years old. They had spent the morning turning compost piles behind the main barn and the afternoon dragging a shivering stray golden retriever mix out of a steep drainage ditch. When they walked up to the farmhouse, they smelled like wet fur and decomposing leaves. Their knees were scraped, their hands were coated in thick gray clay, and they were smiling with pure joy. My mother arrived unannounced right at that moment. She parked her spotless luxury sedan near the porch and stepped out in immaculate heels. She dodged the small puddles in my gravel driveway like they were active landmines. She took one look at Leo, who was gently picking a tick off the dog, and Maya, who was wiping sweat from her face, leaving a thick brown streak across her forehead. My mother did not ask if the dog was hurt. She did not ask if the kids were tired or proud of themselves for saving a life. Her jaw tightened. She looked at my worn denim and work boots with a disgust she did not even try to hide. "They are wild animals, Hazel," she said. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper so the farmhands would not hear. "Look at them. No discipline, no refinement. You let them run around like feral creatures when they should be in etiquette classes learning how to present themselves." I handed the twins a dry towel and told them to take the dog inside to the mudroom. I watched them walk away carrying a dog that needed them. Then I turned back to my mother. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my parenting. I just looked at her and told her that a child who does not know how to pull weeds will never know how to grow anything worth keeping. My mother smoothed the lapels of her cashmere coat. Her eyes went flat and cold. She did not yell. In our family, yelling was considered low class. Instead, she used the weapon she had always used to keep people in line: money and fear. "You are ruining their future, Hazel," she said. She delivered the words like a judge passing a final sentence. "And mark my words, I will not fund their failures. When they realize they have nothing but a dirt farm to their name, do not come crying to me." She turned around, got back into her spotless car, and drove away without saying goodbye to her grandchildren. I stood in the driveway and listened to the gravel crunch under her tires. I felt a tight knot form in my chest, but it was not fear. It was clarity. I knew right then that she was going to spend the rest of her life trying to force my children into her mold, and I was going to spend the rest of my life making sure they stayed free. The years moved forward, and the twins grew into the natural, unhurried rhythm of the Oregon seasons. By the time Leo and Maya turned 15, they were no longer just playing in the dirt behind the barn. They were studying it. Our mornings started at dawn, long before the sun cleared the jagged pine-covered silhouette of Mount Hood. I would walk into the main greenhouse and find Leo holding a glass test tube up to the early light, carefully charting the pH balance of the compost beds. He treated the soil like a living, breathing patient. Maya spent all her free afternoons at the county animal shelter, rehabilitating surrendered working dogs that had been neglected or forgotten. Her hands were perpetually marked with tiny scratches from nervous paws, and her denim jeans were permanently faded at the knees. This was our life. It smelled like damp cedar roasted morning coffee and physical effort. In our community, getting your hands dirty in nature and prioritizing environmental sustainability were badge of honor traditions. We lived in a state celebrated for its rugged coastlines and deep-rooted eco-consciousness. A calloused hand meant you were contributing. A muddy boot meant you were present. 30 miles away, in a gated Portland enclave, my mother lived in a museum. Victoria resided in a sterile, high society bubble where appearances functioned as the only acceptable currency. Her world smelled of lemon polish and ozone from expensive air purifiers. Everything in her house possessed a dedicated, unmovable place, and nothing was ever allowed to simply exist. The air always felt thin in her living room, suffocated by the heavy weight of unspoken expectations. We were required to breathe that thin air on the first Sunday of every month. Victoria called it a cherished family tradition. I knew it was an inspection. The invitation always arrived with a dictated dress code: slacks, polished loafers, collared blouses, no denim, no exceptions. That particular Sunday in late October, the air held a sharp, biting chill. The twins had spent the entire morning helping me repair a broken irrigation line in the lower pasture. We scrubbed our hands at the outdoor sink until our skin turned bright pink, trying to erase the evidence of our mourning. We changed into the stiff, restrictive clothes Victoria demanded. Maya wore a navy dress that pinched her shoulders, and Leo tugged at a rigid collar that looked like it was choking him. I checked the soles of their shoes before we got into the truck. They looked spotless in the fading afternoon light. We arrived at the Portland estate exactly on time, knowing lateness was another punishable offense. My mother unlocked the heavy oak front door, wearing a tailored silk pantsuit that likely cost more than my entire greenhouse heating system. She offered a tight, closed-mouth smile. Her gaze instantly swept over us, scanning our posture and our clothing for defects. She led us into the formal dining room without offering a hug or a kind word. The dining room floor was covered by a vast expanse of pristine ivory wool. It was a rug so pale, it looked afraid of its own shadow. Maya walked in first, her shoulders hunched slightly under the weight of her grandmother's silent judgment. She took 3 steps. That was all it took. A single microscopic speck of dried earth fell from the deep tread of Maya's dress shoe. It landed softly on the ivory fibers. To anyone else, it would have been invisible. To Victoria, it was a flashing siren. My mother stopped walking. The silence in the room grew heavy, pressing against our eardrums. A grandfather clock ticked in the hallway, counting the seconds before the storm. Victoria pointed a manicured finger at the floor, her nail painted a flawless, icy red. "What is that on my rug?" she asked. Her tone dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Maya looked down her cheeks, flushing a deep, painful crimson. "I am sorry, grandmother. I thought I cleaned my shoes. I was at the shelter earlier and the yard was wet." Victoria held up her hand, slicing the apology in half. "I do not want to hear about that place," she said. Her voice dripped with quiet venom. "I have told your mother repeatedly, people of our class do not spend their weekends hauling waste and touching diseased strays. We hire people for manual labor. We do not perform it ourselves." She stepped closer to Maya, invading my daughter's personal space. "Look at your hands, Maya. Look at those calluses. You look like a common field hand. It is humiliating to watch you degrade yourself. You belong in a proper parlor learning etiquette, not rolling around in the filth. I expect a formal apology for bringing this dirt into my home." Maya shrank back, her eyes watering. She opened her mouth to apologize, conditioning kicking in, ready to bend the way my mother always made people bend. Leo shifted his weight, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with his sister. He did not speak, but the subtle tightening of his jaw and the protective stance of his body spoke volumes. My son possessed a quiet strength forged by early mornings breaking frozen topsoil and carrying heavy feed sacks. He was not intimidated by a silk suit or a fancy dining room. I felt a surge of profound pride. They were a team, unbreakable and resilient, anchored by the reality of the natural world rather than the fragile ego of high society. I stepped between Victoria and my children. I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone flat, a smooth stone skipping over a frozen lake. "She is not apologizing, Mother," I said. Victoria blinked, her head snapping toward me. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "Maya works hard," I replied, holding my mother's furious gaze without blinking. "Those calluses are from holding leashes for animals that nobody else wanted. That dirt is from land that feeds people. There is nothing humiliating about effort. The only thing embarrassing in this room is the way you belittle your own granddaughter over a piece of wool. Oregon was built on unpolished resilience, not finishing schools. They are doing exactly what they are supposed to do." Victoria's posture went rigid, the veins in her neck pressed tight against her skin. She was waiting for me to flinch, to look away, to break the tension, the way I used to when I was a teenager living under her roof. But I was not a teenager anymore. I was a woman who had built a life out of raw earth, and I was not going to let her tear down my daughter for doing the same. I watched the exact moment my mother realized that shame was no longer an effective tool against us. The disgust in her eyes morphed into cold, silent calculation. She took a slow, measured breath, smoothed the front of her silk jacket, and offered a chilling smile that did not reach her eyes. "Fine," she whispered, turning her back on us to walk toward the dining table. "If you refuse to teach them how the real world operates, Hazel, I suppose I will just have to take matters into my own hands." The dinner proceeded in suffocating silence. The clinking of silver forks against fine china echoed like tiny hammers. Victoria served an endive salad with a drizzle of balsamic reduction, followed by the prime rib. It was visually perfect, plated with geometric precision, yet it lacked any warmth or soul. I thought about the hearty, chaotic meals we shared at our farmhouse table, passing bowls of mismatched, misshapen heirloom tomatoes we grew ourselves. There was laughter in our kitchen. There was life. Here, sitting under a chandelier that cost a small fortune, the air felt dead. I watched Victoria cut her meat, the silver knife sliding through the cut with mechanical efficiency. She did not speak to the twins for the rest of the evening. She just watched them. She was planning something. I could feel the shift in the current, the subtle change in the air pressure. My mother knew she could not bully my children into submission. They were too strong, too grounded in the life we had built. So as she sipped her crystal glass of sparkling water, I realized her new strategy. If she could not shame them into obeying her rules, she would simply open her checkbook and try to buy their compliance. A year passed, bringing Leo and Maya to their 16th birthdays. Their grassroots environmental work had expanded far beyond our property lines and local community gardens. Leo developed a low-cost water filtration system utilizing crushed activated charcoal and local river sand, designed specifically to combat rural agricultural runoff. Maya secured a small municipal grant to train surrendered shelter dogs for ecological tracking, helping local rangers locate invasive plant species across the Oregon wilderness. They were sharp, driven, and deeply invested in the soil. Their dedication required early mornings and late nights, leaving them perpetually smelling of wet cedar and rain. I watched them build something real from the ground up, and my pride anchored me during the harder seasons. Then, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in our mailbox. It carried the embossed gold seal of a prominent downtown Portland law firm. Victoria did not call to invite me for coffee. She dispatched a legal summons. I drove into the city the following Tuesday, parking my weathered truck between rows of sleek black sedans in an underground garage. The law office occupied the top floor of a glass high-rise overlooking the gray, sweeping current of the Willamette River. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. I walked into the conference room wearing clean denim and a simple cotton button-down, refusing to play dress-up for an ambush. Victoria sat at the head of a long mahogany table. Her silver hair was styled into a flawless, rigid bob. A pristine porcelain teacup rested on a saucer in front of her. To her right sat an older man in a tailored charcoal suit, pushing a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. "Hazel, this is Richard," my mother said. Her silver spoon struck the side of her teacup with a sharp metallic clink. "He manages the family estate portfolio. I asked you here because your children are turning 16. It is time to think about their future before you trap them in that rural fantasy of yours." Richard cleared his throat, tapping the thick document against the table to align the pages. He slid the folder toward me. The cover page read, "Trust Agreement," in bold, stark lettering. "Your mother has established 2 generous educational funds for Leo and Maya," Richard explained, folding his hands over his yellow legal pad. "These accounts hold enough capital to cover full tuition, room and board at any Ivy League business school of their choosing. Upon graduation, they will receive an additional living stipend to launch their respective corporate careers. The total financial value is life-changing." I looked at the stack of paper. It looked heavy. I knew my mother did not give gifts. She purchased leverage. I opened the folder and began to read. The first 3 pages outlined the financial structures and tax implications. The prose was dense, designed to impress and confuse. Then I reached Section 4, Conditions of Disbursement. I read the legal text slowly, dissecting the paragraphs with the quiet procedural focus I used when auditing my farm supply ledgers. The clauses were buried under complex financial jargon, but the intent shone through, clear and binding. Clause A dictated that the beneficiaries must immediately cease all volunteer activities deemed inappropriate or unrefined by the primary trustee. The primary trustee was Victoria. Clause B required Leo and Maya to legally abandon their current agricultural and environmental initiatives, transferring any intellectual property to the trust. Clause C mandated their attendance at an exclusive Swiss finishing program for the next 2 consecutive summers to prepare them for integration into proper society. I closed the folder. The thick parchment felt cold under my fingertips. I slid it back across the smooth mahogany surface, watching it stop just short of Richard's legal pad. "This is not a trust," I said, keeping my voice steady and even. "This is a purchase agreement. You are trying to put a price tag on my children." Victoria picked up her teacup. The porcelain rattled slightly against the saucer, betraying her simmering irritation. "I am offering them a respectable life, Hazel. I am offering them prestige and security. They cannot spend the rest of their days hauling dirt and catering to stray mutts. They need polishing. They need to learn how the real world operates." "They already know how the real world operates," I replied, holding her gaze. "They know how to filter toxic agricultural runoff. They know how to rehabilitate broken animals that society threw away. They know how to work until their hands blister to fix a problem nobody else wants to solve. That takes a kind of brilliance a Swiss finishing school can never teach." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair, looking down at his notes. Victoria set her cup down hard. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. "You are a fool," she snapped, her polished composure cracking to reveal the viciousness underneath. Her voice carried a harsh, cutting edge. "You think that little dirt farm of yours is going to provide them with real opportunities? You think local municipal grants and muddy boots will secure their future? You are setting them up for a lifetime of mediocrity because you are too stubborn to accept my help." I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. I did not yell. I did not slam my fist on the table or list the ways she had failed me. "I am setting them up to be authentic," I said. "Keep your money, Mother. We do not need it." I walked out of the glass room, leaving the trust document sitting abandoned on the table. The drive back to the farm felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for an hour. The sterile concrete of the city gave way to towering Douglas firs and winding 2-lane roads. The jagged peak of Mount Hood appeared in the distance, a steadfast reminder of what actually mattered. When I walked into the farmhouse kitchen, Leo and Maya were sitting at the scarred wooden table reviewing a soil analysis chart. Maya had a smudge of grease on her cheek, and Leo was wearing a worn flannel shirt missing 2 buttons. I poured 3 mugs of hot apple cider, sitting down across from them. I did not soften the truth. I presented the offer exactly as it was laid out on that mahogany table. I explained the Ivy League promise, the Swiss finishing school requirement, and the explicit legal mandate to quit the animal shelter and the farm projects. I watched their faces closely. I expected them to be conflicted. I expected the allure of free college and guaranteed wealth to cause at least a brief moment of hesitation. 16-year-olds often dream of easy paths, and my mother had offered them a golden paved highway. Instead, Leo looked at Maya. Maya looked at Leo, and they started laughing. It was not a bitter or defensive laugh. It was genuine, ringing laughter that filled our warm kitchen and echoed off the wooden beams. "A Swiss finishing school?" Maya asked, wiping a genuine tear of mirth from her eye. "Do they teach you how to properly fold compost in the Alps?" Leo shook his head, wrapping his calloused hands around his warm mug. "She wants us to trade actual impact for a business degree we did not ask for. We have the new water filtration trial starting next month with the local watershed council. We cannot leave that. Who would monitor the sediment levels?" They chose the farm. They chose the grueling, unglamorous work. They chose their own authenticity over a lifetime of funded compliance. The relief that washed over me was profound. It validated every choice I had made since bringing them to this patch of Oregon soil. They knew their own worth, and it could not be bought. But the victory remained confined to our kitchen. When Victoria received formal notification from Richard that we had officially declined the trust funds, she did not accept defeat gracefully. People who rely on control never view a firm boundary as a simple refusal. They view it as an active declaration of war. If she could not buy their compliance, she would ensure their current path became impossible to navigate. Victoria realized that the twins drew their strength and their purpose from their grassroots projects, so she decided to sever those roots. I did not know it yet as I watched my children laugh over their cider, but my mother was already picking up her phone, drafting a plan to tear down everything they had built. By the time Leo and Maya turned 17, their roots in the local community had grown far too deep to be easily severed. They had spent the year following my mother's failed financial ambush, building something remarkable. They launched a massive collaborative initiative that bridged Leo's agricultural science with Maya's animal rehabilitation work. They secured an unused 2-acre lot adjacent to the county animal shelter and transformed it into a large-scale community composting and garden project. The concept was brilliant in its practical simplicity. Local restaurants and grocery stores donated their organic waste. Leo engineered a sophisticated series of aerated bins to break down the material into rich fertilizer without producing methane buildup. The resulting nutrient-dense soil was then used to cultivate a sprawling vegetable garden. Maya integrated her shelter dogs into the ecosystem, designing sensory walking paths through the garden to help desensitize anxious animals before adoption. The initiative gained rapid traction across the state. Local newspapers wrote favorable articles, and community members lined up on Saturday mornings to purchase the organic produce and volunteer with the animals. It was a sanctuary built on hard work and environmental stewardship. It smelled of turned earth, blooming lavender, and the distinct metallic tang of fresh well water. But to my mother, Victoria, this beautiful, thriving ecosystem was an unforgivable public embarrassment. Victoria lived in a social circle where charitable giving meant writing a tax-deductible check at a black tie gala while wearing diamonds. The idea that her biological grandchildren were actively soliciting rotting vegetables from local diners and managing biological waste in the public eye horrified her. She was terrified that her pristine reputation would be tarnished if her wealthy peers associated her family name with what she privately referred to as municipal garbage collection. Since her money could not force us into submission, she decided to use her social leverage to burn the project to the ground. The interference began on a crisp Tuesday morning in early spring. A White County utility vehicle pulled up to the shelter garden gates. A zoning enforcement officer stepped out carrying a metal clipboard. He did not smile. He handed Leo a thick stack of triplicate carbon paper forms. They were official citations. The officer explained that the municipal board had received a sudden flood of anonymous complaints. The grievances cited severe odor violations, hazardous noise levels from the shelter dogs, and unauthorized industrial agricultural operations in a commercially zoned district. The citations carried heavy daily fines and a mandatory cease and desist order effective within 48 hours. If the bins were not dismantled and the garden cleared, the county would bulldoze the lot. I arrived at the shelter an hour later to find my children standing in the center of their garden, looking utterly defeated. Leo was staring at a half-finished irrigation pipe, his shoulders slumped under the weight of bureaucratic destruction. Maya was sitting on a wooden bench, clutching the collar of a deaf cattle dog, with tears streaming down her face. They were brilliant, resilient teenagers, but they were still young, and they had never faced the cold, mechanical, crushing power of local government. I took the citations from Leo's hand. I read the violation codes, feeling the thin, crinkly texture of the carbon paper beneath my thumbs. I did not offer hollow comforts. I did not tell them everything would magically be all right. Instead, I relied on the quiet, meticulous focus I used to balance my farm ledgers during drought seasons. Something about the paperwork felt fundamentally wrong. The compost system Leo designed was virtually odorless, utilizing strict carbon to nitrogen ratios. Furthermore, the nearest residential neighborhood was over 3 miles away, separated by a dense barrier of mature pine trees. It was geographically impossible for anyone to be disturbed by the ambient noise or the smell. I told the twins to keep working while I went into the city. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. The municipal building was a brutalist concrete structure smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. I requested the public records for the zoning complaints filed against the shelter lot. The clerk handed me a printed manifest containing a dozen names and addresses. I sat at a scratched wooden table in the corner of the records room and cross-referenced the data. I spent 3 hours tracking the property tax records associated with the names on the list. The geographical pattern emerged with crystal clarity. None of the complainants lived anywhere near the animal shelter. In fact, every single grievance originated from a specific affluent zip code 30 miles away in the West Hills of Portland. I recognized the third name on the list, Eleanor Vance. She was my mother's longtime tennis partner. The seventh name belonged to the husband of Victoria's favorite interior designer. The final name was the president of the Portland Historical Society, a woman who frequently hosted charity luncheons alongside my mother. Victoria had weaponized her country club connections. She had convinced her elite social circle to file false municipal reports to artificially trigger a zoning shutdown. She wanted to destroy my children's passion project without leaving her own fingerprints on the weapon. I felt a cold, absolute clarity settle into my chest. Anger is a fleeting emotion that leads to careless mistakes. I did not need anger. I needed data. I left the municipal building and walked 2 blocks to a small independent stationery store. I purchased a hardcover ledger book with a dark green binding and thick, unlined pages. I bought a heavy black archival ink pen. I went back to my truck and sat in the driver's seat staring at the blank first page. I wrote the date at the top. Below it, I documented the exact nature of the zoning complaints. I listed the names of Victoria's friends, the distances of their homes from the shelter, and the obvious impossibility of their claims. I taped a photocopy of the county manifest to the adjacent page. This green notebook became my silent weapon. There would be no screaming matches in my mother's foyer. There would be no dramatic confrontations where she could twist my words and paint me as an ungrateful, hysterical daughter. From this moment forward, I would treat her malicious behavior like a pest infestation in my crops. I would track it, document it, and systematically eradicate it using undeniable proof. I drove back to the shelter and called Leo and Maya into the small administrative office. I placed the green ledger on the desk and explained exactly what their grandmother had done. I watched the realization wash over their faces. The sadness in their eyes hardened into a fierce, determined focus. I told them that the world is full of people who will try to use rules to crush you. The only way to survive is to understand those rules better than they do. We spent the next 48 hours dissecting county municipal codes. We turned the dining room table into a war room covered in highlighter markers and legal printouts. Leo calculated wind dispersion patterns and gathered soil emission data from the local university agricultural extension. Maya documented the exact decibel levels of the shelter dogs, cross-referencing them with the ambient noise of the nearby highway to prove the complaints were statistically fabricated. We found a forgotten clause in the state environmental charter that offered strict zoning protections for educational composting initiatives. When Friday morning arrived, we did not dismantle the garden. We walked into the Municipal Zoning Board hearing room together. The room was filled with bored city council members expecting a quick administrative closure. Instead, my 17-year-old children approached the microphone with the cold, hard stoicism of seasoned litigators. They presented their data packets with flawless precision. They showed the wind maps, the decibel logs, and the environmental charter exemptions. Then I stepped forward and submitted the public address records of the complainants, pointing out the geographic impossibility of their grievances. I did not accuse anyone of a coordinated conspiracy. I simply laid the facts on the table and let the glaring inconsistencies speak for themselves. The silence in the hearing room was absolute. The zoning inspector looked at the data, cleared his throat, and officially dismissed every single citation. Furthermore, the board was so impressed by the twins' presentation that they granted the project a permanent agricultural educational zoning variance, making it entirely immune to future residential complaints. We drove home in victorious silence. The project was saved, the boundaries were secured. But as I placed the green ledger back on my desk that evening, I knew the war was far from over. Victoria had failed to buy my children, and she had failed to shut them down through local bureaucracy. Her bridge club friends had been exposed as liars on the municipal record, a humiliation Victoria would never forgive. She had exhausted her quiet, covert methods of control. The realization that she could not manipulate our reality through back channels meant she was running out of options. If she wanted to break our spirit, she would have to step out of the shadows and attempt to destroy our credibility on a much larger and vastly more public stage. Summer arrived early that year, baking the Oregon landscape into a vibrant mosaic of dry emerald pine and golden wheat. The air hung thick with the scent of blooming blackberry brambles and sun-baked earth. Leo and Maya celebrated their 18th birthdays without a country club gala or expensive catered hors d'oeuvres. They spent the morning sitting at our scarred wooden kitchen table filling out official state articles of incorporation. They formally named their initiative Roots and Resilience, registering it as a dedicated nonprofit organization. Their grassroots project had rapidly outgrown the 2-acre municipal lot adjacent to the county shelter. They wanted to scale their sustainable agricultural designs and animal rehabilitation frameworks to a global level. Maya had developed a comprehensive training manual for utilizing rescue dogs in ecological conservation zones. Leo had finalized the blueprints for a modular, low-cost water purification system designed for rural farming communities in developing nations. They possessed the data, the operational blueprints, and the relentless drive necessary to succeed. However, expanding a localized operation into a worldwide charitable model required substantial seed capital. They needed serious financial backing to build international infrastructure, secure shipping logistics, and hire administrative support. Maya spent weeks drafting impeccable grant proposals fueled by endless pots of strong black coffee. Leo prepared comprehensive logistical projections utilizing advanced soil analytics and complex budget spreadsheets. I leveraged every professional contact within my regional agricultural network to secure introductory meetings with prominent philanthropic foundations based in Portland. We anticipated a challenging pitching process, but we knew the data was undeniably strong. Then, the invisible walls slammed shut with deafening silence. Wealthy donors who had previously expressed enthusiastic interest during preliminary phone calls suddenly became entirely unavailable. Scheduled appointments vanished from corporate calendars with zero explanation. When we walked into downtown high-rises, we were greeted by receptionists offering cold, rehearsed apologies and flat, unblinking stares. We sat in pristine waiting rooms, smelling of synthetic lavender and polished glass, only to be dismissed by junior associates claiming their funding cycles were unexpectedly closed. The rejections were not based on the merit of the project. The dismissals felt orchestrated, synchronized, and deeply unnatural. A shadowy barrier had been erected around my children. I needed to understand the sudden financial freeze. I drove into the city alone to visit an old acquaintance named Clara, who owned a boutique floral nursery near the river. Clara occasionally supplied lavish botanical arrangements for elite high society events. I found her trimming blue hydrangeas in the back of her humid glass greenhouse. The enclosed atmosphere smelled heavy with wet potting soil fertilizer and crushed green stems. Clara reluctantly explained the situation over a cup of bitter black tea, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. My mother, Victoria, had been exceptionally busy over the past month. At every charity gala, elite dinner party, and private country club luncheon, she had strategically assassinated my children's professional credibility. Victoria deliberately characterized their registered nonprofit as a frivolous, mismanaged teenage hobby. She warned influential local investors that backing the twins would be a disastrous waste of capital. She framed their ambitious endeavor as a naive, chaotic phase destined for spectacular public failure, urging her wealthy peers to protect their portfolios by ignoring our proposals. She painted us as a massive liability. A younger version of myself might have driven directly to my mother's pristine estate and shattered her antique heirloom vases across the ivory rug, but the green ledger sitting on my desk had taught me the profound futility of emotional outbursts. Confrontation was exactly the dramatic currency Victoria desperately craved. She wanted me to storm into her parlor screaming and desperate so she could play the victim and prove her false narrative about our feral lack of refinement. I refused to pay her that toll. Anger is a predictable reaction, but calculated silence is a terrifying strategy. Instead of fighting a rigged battle in her territory, I decided to change the battlefield entirely. I left Clara's greenhouse and drove my weathered truck straight to the local agricultural credit union in our small rural town. The drive gave me time to solidify my resolve, watching the towering Douglas firs blur past my window. The credit union lobby smelled of stale industrial carpet cleaner, cheap peppermint candies, and old paper. The environment starkly contrasted the sterile, wealthy architecture of Portland. The loan officer, a soft-spoken man named Thomas, placed a thick stack of legal documents on his laminated desk. He pushed a heavy black pen across the desk toward me. The metal barrel felt cold against my calloused fingers. I was legally authorizing a massive second mortgage on my organic farm. I was risking the rich, fertile soil I had cultivated for 2 decades. I was leveraging my entire livelihood, my home and my future, to fund my children's authenticity. If Roots and Resilience failed, the bank would seize the acreage and we would lose everything we had built. I looked down at the signature line. The fluorescent overhead lights hummed with a low, steady vibration, creating a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet room. I did not hesitate. I gripped the pen and signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes. I bet my sanctuary on their brilliance because true growth always requires planting a seed in the dark. Information travels at a staggering speed when you cross financial boundaries in a small state. Within 24 hours, my mobile phone vibrated sharply against the kitchen counter. The screen displayed a missed call from Victoria. I tapped the glass to play the audio message while I stood at the sink washing freshly harvested carrots. Her voice crackled through the small speaker, dripping with condescending pity and malicious joy. "I heard about your little bank trip, Hazel," she said, her tone razor-thin and sharp. "Taking on massive debt to indulge a foolish child fantasy? How utterly pathetic. When the bank forecloses on your little dirt patch, do not expect a warm guest room here. I will not rescue you from your own stupidity. Enjoy your inevitable bankruptcy." The audio clicked off, leaving a heavy silence in the kitchen. I listened to the message twice. My pulse remained steady. I did not delete the audio. I carefully exported the digital file, transferring it to a highly secure encrypted folder on my computer labeled Receipts. Then I opened my physical green notebook. I uncapped my archival ink pen and transcribed her exact vindictive words onto the thick, unlined paper, dating the entry precisely. Victoria believed she was issuing a terrifying warning. She did not realize she was simply handing me another piece of undeniable evidence. She was documenting her own cruelty, and I was becoming a meticulous historian. Every action she took was systematically cataloged, building a foundation of proof that would eventually become insurmountable. The farm equity provided the exact amount of seed money required to launch the first international pilot program. Roots and Resilience utilized the capital to purchase industrial filtration equipment and secure logistical shipping routes, bypassing Victoria's local Portland blockade entirely. The twins were succeeding on their own terms, proving their model worked on a global scale. However, victory is rarely a final destination when dealing with a narcissist. As I watched Maya pack a canvas duffel duffel bag for an environmental leadership conference in Seattle, the mail carrier dropped a certified letter into our metal box. The envelope bore the official seal of the State Agricultural Tax Board. I tore open the flap and read the harsh bureaucratic text. It was a formal notification of a sudden, highly unusual audit of my farm's financial records, citing an anonymous tip regarding fraudulent mortgage applications and tax evasion. Victoria had realized she could not starve the nonprofit by cutting off outside donors, so she decided to completely destroy the agricultural farm that was currently keeping it alive. The State Agricultural Tax Board agent arrived at my property, expecting to uncover a chaotic web of financial deceit. He was a stern man, carrying a heavy leather briefcase, clearly anticipating a hostile confrontation with a panicked farmer. Instead, he walked into a pristine administrative office smelling of lemon oil and old cedar wood. I offered him a comfortable chair and handed him flawlessly organized binders containing every single invoice, bank statement, and operational receipt linked to my second mortgage. I had cross-referenced every penny. The government inspector spent exactly 2 hours reviewing the spotless records before closing his metal briefcase with a sharp click. He looked up at me with genuine respect and actually apologized for wasting my morning. He explained the anonymous tip had been highly aggressive but utterly baseless. That failed bureaucratic ambush signaled a profound shift in my reality. It proved my mother was willing to destroy my entire livelihood to win an argument. 24 months dissolved into the harsh, unpredictable Oregon seasons. My children, Leo and Maya, celebrated their 20th birthdays far away from the insulated comforts of a traditional college campus. They possessed a terrifying, beautiful stamina, operating on grueling 16-hour daily schedules that would break most adults. Maya traveled deep into the humid, deforested regions of South America, sleeping in canvas tents and eating rationed meals. She worked tirelessly training local indigenous guides to utilize her specialized rescue dog tracking methods for vital ecological preservation. Meanwhile, Leo deployed his modular water filtration systems across severely drought-stricken agricultural valleys in Central California, battling complex local politics and extreme weather conditions. Their registered nonprofit initiative transformed from a desperate grassroots gamble into a highly respected international entity recognized by serious environmental scientists. I remained firmly anchored to my rural acreage. I managed the daily crop rotations, repaired broken tractor engines, paid the heavy monthly mortgage installments, and served as their steadfast emotional foundation. Whenever they called home, exhausted and overwhelmed, I reminded them of their inherent worth. But my most crucial covert job occurred long after the sun dipped below the jagged silhouette of Mount Hood. I became a relentless, silent archivist. The dark green notebook sitting locked in my bottom desk drawer grew incredibly thick with undeniable evidence. I was no longer simply surviving my abusive parent. I was actively hunting her through the careful, methodical accumulation of factual proof. The ledger transformed into a devastating factual weapon, a masterclass in quiet patience. When the matriarch attempted to sabotage our international shipping permits by coercing a corrupt customs official she knew from her exclusive country club, I secured the digital correspondence through a sympathetic clerk and logged the exact dates. When 2 wealthy philanthropic investors from Portland quietly reached out to apologize, admitting that Victoria had aggressively threatened their social standing to force them to pull their initial funding, I asked for a massive, unprecedented favor. I requested they sign sworn legal affidavits detailing her exact manipulative threats. Disgusted by her unethical, relentless behavior, they agreed without hesitation. I folded those notarized pages carefully and tucked them securely into the back pocket of the journal. I intentionally stripped every ounce of vulnerability from my strategy. I did not feel sorrow, betrayal, or longing for a normal family dynamic anymore. Anger requires a vulnerable investment, and I had permanently closed my psychological account with that toxic woman. I operated with the cold, calculating precision of a forensic investigator. I meticulously captured screenshots of her passive-aggressive text messages, saving them in triplicate. I downloaded her mocking, arrogant voicemails onto multiple encrypted external hard drives hidden in a fireproof safe. I was not a fragile victim shivering in the shadows praying for a miracle. I was a strategic structural engineer methodically gathering the concrete materials required to build an inescapable legal trap. Late one August afternoon, the oppressive summer heat hung thick and suffocating over the valley floor. The air carried the intense, pungent aroma of freshly spread organic manure across the lower compost fields baking under the relentless sun. It was a glorious, productive scent to any real farmer, but absolute poison to a Portland socialite. A sleek, silver luxury sedan loudly crushed the dry gravel of my driveway, shattering the peaceful afternoon quiet. Victoria stepped out of the air-conditioned vehicle. She wore a pristine, tailored white linen suit, her sharp eyes glaring at the fine layer of airborne dust immediately coating her expensive imported leather shoes. She had driven 30 miles out of her way because she was starving for friction. She desperately needed an emotional reaction to feed her fragile, starving ego. She marched aggressively up my wooden porch steps, pressing a monogrammed silk handkerchief tightly over her nose and mouth. She looked at me with undisguised, blazing contempt. "This place is a repulsive, rotting tragedy, Hazel," she announced, her voice dripping with manufactured pity and venom. "You smell like livestock and decay. Your ungrateful children have abandoned you to play in foreign mud puddles while you rot out here entirely alone. You ruined your life and destroyed their potential just to spite me." I was sitting comfortably in a woven wicker chair, calmly snapping fresh green beans into a large aluminum mixing bowl. I did not stop my hands or alter my rhythm. I did not frown, tense my shoulders, or bite my lip. I slowly looked up and offered her a gentle, entirely hollow smile. I politely agreed the fertilizer was particularly fragrant today, noting it would yield an excellent autumn harvest. I pleasantly asked if she would care for a glass of iced chamomile tea infused with fresh mint. I gave her absolutely zero emotional ammunition. It was the psychological equivalent of her throwing a violent punch at a passing cloud. The profound lack of resistance deeply unsettled her. She wanted me to scream, to fiercely defend my parenting choices, to cry over her harsh judgmental words. My impenetrable calm demeanor confused and ultimately infuriated her. Her perfect posture stiffened, and the blue veins in her neck pressed hard against her aging skin. She opened her mouth to launch another vicious, calculated insult, but suddenly stopped short. There was literally nothing left to attack. My silence had disarmed her completely. She turned around abruptly, descending the wooden stairs with rigid, awkward steps. She climbed back into her spotless car, slamming the heavy door, and sped away, leaving a massive cloud of choking gray dust in her wake. She genuinely believed she had won a minor skirmish, entirely unaware she was playing a complex game I had already meticulously mapped out and rigged. But a starving predator denied its easy prey will inevitably seek a much softer, high-profile target. The following Tuesday morning, I walked down to the rural metal mail carrier box standing at the end of our dusty county road. Inside, resting quietly beneath a stack of heavy Tractor Supply catalogs, was a thick envelope composed of expensive imported textured paper. The return address bore an official embossed crest originating from Oslo, Norway. It was a highly confidential preliminary nomination letter for the Nobel Youth Award. My children had been officially recognized on the ultimate global stage for their environmental contributions. My chest swelled with immense, overwhelming pride until I carefully flipped the heavy envelope over. The thick red wax seal securing the back flap had already been cleanly sliced open. Someone had illegally intercepted, read, and resealed the private contents before it ever reached my rural farm. And resting silently at the very bottom of the dark metal mailbox was a single polished gold button, forcefully torn from a white linen suit. The physical evidence of my mother intercepting the Nobel correspondence went straight into the dark green notebook. But the universe has a fascinating way of correcting massive imbalances when you simply keep doing the honest, grueling work. By the time autumn painted the Oregon Valley in vibrant shades of burnt orange and deep crimson, my children completely shattered the ceiling of their industry. Roots and Resilience launched a revolutionary ecological initiative that fundamentally altered the global landscape of sustainable farming. Maya and Leo designed a biological matrix utilizing compressed agricultural waste, specifically discarded walnut shells and fermented olive pulp, to actively regenerate completely barren, drought-cracked earth. They tested the matrix on a lifeless tract of scorched land in eastern Oregon. Within 6 months, that dead dirt was teeming with microscopic life, holding water like a giant natural sponge and sprouting resilient native grasses. The success was not just a minor local victory. It was a massive, unprecedented ecological breakthrough that captured the attention of the entire scientific community. International environmental organizations began sending high-level delegates to our small rural property. People wearing expensive tailored suits walked carefully through our muddy fields, taking furious notes, while my 21-year-old children confidently explained the chemical breakdown of their biochar systems. But the true turning point arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in late November. I was sitting at the farmhouse kitchen table drinking black coffee when my laptop chimed with a secure, encrypted email notification. It was a formal communication from a highly guarded philanthropic trust representing a famously reclusive tech billionaire based in Seattle. The billionaire had read the preliminary data regarding the soil regeneration matrix and decided to bypass the traditional lengthy grant application process entirely. The attached digital document confirmed an anonymous, unrestricted financial transfer. The sheer numerical value staring back at me from the glowing screen was staggering. It was enough capital to fully fund the nonprofit operations for the next decade and expand their programs across 3 continents. My first action was not to celebrate with champagne or make excited phone calls. I grabbed my keys and drove my weathered truck straight through the torrential rain to the small regional credit union in town. I sat across from Thomas, the soft-spoken loan officer who had processed my desperate second mortgage years prior. I handed him a certified cashier check, completely liquidating the debt attached to my land. The metallic click of his computer keyboard processing the final payoff sounded like heavy iron chains breaking. I walked out of that stale-smelling bank lobby and stood in the freezing rain, breathing in the intense scent of wet asphalt and pure freedom. My organic sanctuary was safe. I had wagered my entire livelihood on the authentic brilliance of my children, and the harvest had yielded a bountiful, extraordinary return. Wealth, however, acts as a massive, blinding beacon to those who worship status. Within 48 hours, a prominent Portland business journal published a glossy front-page feature detailing the massive Seattle grant and the soaring global trajectory of roots and resilience. The publication featured a beautiful, candid photograph of Leo and Maya standing in a restored green pasture. The ink was barely dry on the newspaper before the seismic shift occurred in my mother. The very same woman who had weaponized zoning boards, attempted to bankrupt my farm, and called my children feral animals, suddenly experienced a miraculous, highly convenient bout of selective amnesia. My friend Clara the florist called me from her greenhouse to deliver this staggering update. Victoria had attended a lavish charity luncheon at the country club that afternoon, carrying a pristine copy of the business journal. Clara listened in absolute disgust as my mother paraded the magazine around the linen-draped tables. Victoria boldly referred to the twins as her little prodigies, taking full public credit for instilling them with a strong, dedicated work ethic. She spun a fabricated, glorious narrative about how she had always encouraged their deep connection to the earth, conveniently omitting the years she spent aggressively trying to pave over their dreams with Swiss finishing schools and malicious municipal complaints. Her desperate thirst for proximity to wealth and prestige completely overrode her previous violent disgust for our rural existence. I knew the performance at the country club was merely a rehearsal for the primary assault. The farmhouse landline rang precisely at 6 o'clock that evening. I answered the phone, pressing the cool plastic receiver against my ear. Victoria spoke, and her tone was entirely unrecognizable. The icy sharp edge she usually reserved for me had been entirely replaced by a strained, synthetic warmth that sounded like a cheap violin playing dreadfully out of tune. "Hazel, darling," she crooned the endearment, dripping with fake honey. "I just saw the marvelous news in the journal. I am simply vibrating with pride. I always knew those brilliant minds of theirs would attract the right kind of attention. We must celebrate this monumental family victory properly." I remained entirely silent, allowing her false sweetness to hang awkwardly in the quiet air of my kitchen. Across the room, Leo was carefully soldering a damaged circuit board for a soil monitoring drone. Maya was sitting on the woven rug, reviewing medical charts for a newly rescued shelter dog. They both paused their tasks, looking up at me. I tapped a button on the base of the phone, placing the call on the external speaker. Victoria cleared her throat, clearly unsettled by the lack of enthusiastic reciprocation. Of course, dealing with such a massive, sudden influx of capital is incredibly dangerous for young, inexperienced minds, she continued, pivoting smoothly to her true objective. They need sophisticated guidance, Hazel. They need someone who understands elite financial portfolios and corporate governance. I have spoken with my attorneys, and I am fully prepared to clear my schedule. I suggest you appoint me to the board of directors immediately. I can step in as the primary financial chair and manage their new wealth properly before they make a foolish, naive mistake. Maya rolled her eyes so hard she actually tilted her head backward against the wooden kitchen cabinets. Leo let out a short, quiet burst of laughter, shaking his head and returning his intense focus to the glowing tip of his soldering iron. The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. She wanted to insert herself directly into the vault of the organization she had actively tried to destroy. She wanted the power, the prestigious title, and the absolute control over their triumphant narrative. I looked at the dark green ledger resting on my desk. I thought about the intercepted mail, the zoning citations, the severed donor connections, and the cruel voicemails currently locked in my digital vault. I did not raise my voice or recount her extensive history of malicious sabotage. I utilized the exact, polite, icy professionalism she used to dismiss the service staff at her favorite expensive restaurants. "That is a remarkably generous offer, Mother," I replied, keeping my cadence perfectly flat and measured. However, the board of directors is currently at full capacity. The seats are exclusively occupied by degreed environmental scientists and seasoned agricultural engineers. We do not require any external portfolio management at this time, but I will certainly let the twins know you called to offer your congratulations. Good evening. I reached for the receiver, but before I disconnected the line, I heard a distinct, terrifying shift in her breathing. The synthetic warmth instantly evaporated, replaced by a sharp, ragged intake of air. The polite rejection acted as a direct, devastating blow to her fragile, narcissistic ego. I pressed the end button, severing the connection and cutting off whatever venomous response she was preparing to launch. The farmhouse returned to its peaceful, productive quiet, but a cold knot formed at the base of my neck. Victoria had just been definitively denied access to the very thing she valued above oxygen. She was denied status and control. I knew my mother better than anyone else on earth. She would never accept a closed door. If she could not quietly manipulate her way into their boardroom, she would figure out a way to forcefully insert herself into their public narrative. She was done operating in the shadows. The failed phone call marked the end of her private campaign. She was preparing to hijack their success using the one weapon she wielded with absolute terrifying mastery. She was going to use the media. The second Tuesday of December brought a relentless freezing downpour to the Oregon Valley. The sky hung low and heavy, bruised with dark purple storm clouds that aggressively scraped against the towering, jagged summit of Mount Hood. Inside the main agricultural barn, the air felt completely insulated from the bitter, biting cold. The massive structure smelled intensely of dried sweet alfalfa, aging wet cedar planks, and the rich, dark scent of freshly turned earth. Maya and Leo were standing at the long aluminum workbenches, completely absorbed in their daily meticulous routine. They were not wearing designer luxury clothes or attending elite high society networking mixers. Maya was dressed in a thick, faded wool sweater permanently covered in coarse dog hair from the local animal shelter. Leo wore heavy, insulated, waterproof overalls, deeply stained with dark green algae harvested from his rural water filtration tanks. They were currently dissecting core soil samples pulled from their newest ecological regeneration site. The fluorescent overhead bulbs buzzed with a low, comforting mechanical hum, casting long, dramatic shadows across the cracked concrete floor. I stood near the massive sliding wooden doors, holding a steaming ceramic mug of strong black coffee, just watching them work. My tired hands were wrapped tightly around the warm, molded clay, soaking in the simple, profound beauty of their quiet dedication. They spoke in soft, synchronized murmurs, passing small glass vials and digital measuring calipers back and forth without ever needing to ask. They operated as a brilliant, unified force, firmly grounded in shared purpose and absolute moral clarity. My mobile phone rested silently on a stacked column of empty wooden produce crates near the edge of the workbench. It suddenly began to vibrate fiercely against the rough timber, rattling the loose, dry splinters. I walked over and glanced down at the glowing digital display. The caller identification did not show a familiar local area code or a recognized domestic administrative number. It displayed a very long string of foreign digits originating from Northern Europe. Specifically, the screen read Oslo, Norway. I picked up the vibrating device, the cold, smooth glass screen pressed firmly against my cheek. I answered with a simple, polite greeting. The voice on the other end belonged to an older gentleman possessing a thick, highly refined Scandinavian accent. He spoke with immense, measured professional gravity. He formally asked to speak directly with the primary founders of Roots and Resilience. I handed the device to Leo, who hastily wiped his muddy hands on a coarse cotton towel before pressing the phone to his ear. Maya immediately stepped closer to her brother, sensing the instant profound shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. I watched my son listen intently. His physical posture changed entirely. The relaxed, natural curve of his broad shoulders suddenly snapped completely rigid. His eyes widened significantly, staring blankly at the rusted, corrugated tin wall situated across the dark room. He did not speak a single word for a long, agonizing minute. He only nodded silently, absorbing the staggering weight of the sentences pouring through the tiny speaker. When the international call finally concluded, he lowered the phone slowly, as if the small device suddenly weighed 100 pounds. He looked at Maya, then he looked at me. His voice trembled barely, a fragile whisper cutting through the loud, rhythmic sound of the heavy rain drumming against the metal roof. "We won," he said. "The Global Committee just voted. We were officially selected for the Nobel Peace Prize Youth Award." For a single suspended, terrifying second, the entire world stopped spinning on its axis. The pouring rain ceased to make a sound. The buzzing fluorescent lights stopped humming. Then the massive reality of his statement collided with the physical space, and the barn absolutely exploded with unfiltered, raw, beautiful emotion. There were no expensive bottles of imported vintage champagne waiting to be uncorked. There were no delicate crystal flutes or catered artisan appetizers. There were just three people standing in heavy, muddy boots, wearing worn-out work clothes, crashing into a desperate, fierce embrace. Maya let out a loud, joyful sob, burying her wet face deep into her brother's shoulder. I wrapped my arms tightly around both of them, holding them so fiercely my muscles physically ached. We stood in the center of the damp concrete floor, surrounded by dirty soil samples and rusted farm tools, crying hot tears of absolute, pure vindication. We stayed locked together for a very long time, swaying slightly while the freezing winter Oregon storm raged violently outside the wooden walls. This exact suspended moment validated every grueling sacrifice I had ever made as a parent. It validated every terrifying, lonely decision to protect them from my mother's sterile synthetic world. Victoria measured human success through exclusive country club memberships, tailored silk suits, and the shallow, transactional applause of her wealthy peers. She believed true prestige could only be purchased with a platinum credit card or inherited through a family trust. But standing in that drafty agricultural building, smelling wet wool and rich living soil, I knew she was fundamentally entirely wrong. True prestige is earned in the dark, unseen corners of the world. It is forged through relentless, unglamorous physical effort. My beautiful, resilient children had literally changed the world by keeping their calloused hands buried deep in the dirt. When our breathing finally steadied and we wiped the tears from our flushed faces, Leo explained the strict legal stipulations the Norwegian committee had outlined during the call. The official global press release was scheduled for that upcoming Friday morning. Until that exact moment, the information was considered highly classified. We were placed under a strict, mandatory media embargo. We agreed to keep the monumental news completely contained within the safe walls of our farmhouse. We would not call close friends, we would not notify local agricultural partners, and we certainly would not inform my mother. We desperately wanted to preserve the pure sanctity of the achievement for just 3 more quiet days. However, massive, earth-shattering secrets possess a dangerous kinetic energy in small regional communities. The Norwegian committee had quietly contacted a prominent local state university earlier that week to verify some of the twins' early soil data as part of their final rigorous vetting process. A university administrative assistant casually mentioned the highly unusual international inquiry to a close friend over lunch. That friend happened to be married to a hungry junior reporter employed at the Portland City Chronicle. By Thursday afternoon, a massive, unconfirmed rumor was rapidly burning through the regional journalism circuits like a wild brush fire. A local prodigy team was about to secure the most prestigious global humanitarian award in existence. The ambitious junior reporter desperately needed immediate verification before his cautious editor would authorize running the exclusive front-page headline. He could not reach my phone because I was driving the heavy tractor in the lower pasture, completely cut off from cellular service. The twins were deep in the dense state forest running a complex dog tracking simulation without their mobile devices. Desperate for a confirming quote, the journalist dug frantically through the public municipal and corporation records for roots and resilience. He found an old historical zoning document containing a secondary emergency contact from the early days when we were fighting the local county board. He found the name and private home number of Victoria Evans. Victoria was sitting comfortably in her pristine living room sipping imported loose-leaf tea when the landline rang. The reporter introduced himself quickly, explaining he was chasing a highly confidential international tip. He asked her directly if she could provide an exclusive familial comment regarding the impending Nobel Youth Award announcement concerning her grandchildren. My mother was entirely blindsided by the question. She had absolutely no idea the award was even a remote possibility. The sheer magnitude of the phrase Nobel Prize struck her like a physical lightning bolt. But Victoria was an absolute apex predator when it came to manipulating public relations and social currency. She instantly recognized this call as the ultimate golden ticket. This was the absolute pinnacle of global high society prestige delivered directly to her lap on a silver platter. She did not hesitate for a single second. She did not ask the reporter to wait so she could contact me and verify the facts. She did not care about breaking legal embargoes or honoring the hard, grueling work of the children she had once cruelly called feral animals. She set her delicate teacup down gently on the glass coffee table. She smoothed her perfect silver hair, took a slow, measured breath, and slipped seamlessly into the role of the devoted, visionary matriarch. She formally confirmed the massive rumor on the official journalistic record. Furthermore, she boldly claimed she had personally funded their initial research and provided the essential foundational guidance that made their incredible global success possible. I returned to the farmhouse just as the sun began to set, casting long, dark, ominous shadows across the gravel driveway. I kicked off my muddy work boots on the front porch and walked slowly into the kitchen. My laptop was sitting open on the wooden dining table, emitting a bright, frantic blue glow. My email inbox was rapidly overflowing with hundreds of urgent media inquiries. My chest tightened with sudden, cold, terrifying dread. I clicked on the top message. It was a breaking news alert from the Portland City Chronicle, published exactly 10 minutes prior. The massive, bold headline screamed across the digital page, announcing the Nobel victory to the entire world 24 hours before the official Norwegian embargo was supposed to lift. But the true devastation lay directly beneath the bold text. The article featured a massive exclusive interview with Victoria, detailing her profound personal financial sacrifices and her unparalleled brilliant leadership in guiding the twins to international glory. The peaceful, sacred celebration we shared in the barn was entirely shattered. Victoria had forcefully kicked down the door and publicly hijacked the absolute greatest achievement of my children's lives, setting the perfect stage for a spectacular, devastating collision. The morning sun broke through the heavy, lingering rain clouds, casting a stark yellow light across my kitchen table. The official Norwegian committee formally lifted the media embargo exactly at dawn, but my mother had already thoroughly contaminated the global narrative waters. Victoria launched an absolute synchronized offensive before we even finished brewing our morning coffee. My open laptop illuminated the scarred wooden table with an endless scrolling feed of aggressive notifications. She evidently hired a boutique public relations firm overnight to maximize her visibility. The coordinated digital effort was terrifyingly efficient and deeply calculated. Every major social platform became completely saturated with her carefully fabricated reality. She posted a highly curated album of vintage photographs. They were the only pictures she actually possessed. The images featured Leo and Maya at age 10, trapped in those stiff, suffocating formal outfits from the terrible Sunday dinners she used to mandate. There was not a single image showing them touching the soil, planting a seed, or holding a frightened rescue dog. Instead, they looked like pale, miserable porcelain dolls trapped in a sterile museum. The captions underneath the photos made my stomach physically turn. Victoria boldly declared herself their primary benefactor and guiding moral compass. She wrote sprawling, fictionalized essays detailing how she personally instilled the profound values of global philanthropy into their young minds. She claimed My Organic Farm was merely a quaint, temporary staging ground for her grand master plan. The engagement metrics displayed on the screen were absolutely staggering. Portland high society flooded the comment sections with blind adoration. Women who had previously mocked our rural existence now praised my mother for raising such extraordinary global visionaries. They called her an inspiration, a brilliant matriarch, and a selfless patron of the environmental sciences. It was a flawless digital theft. She systematically stole their grueling late nights, their blistered hands, and their brilliant scientific breakthroughs, replacing all of that authentic work with her polished country club mythology. Leo and Maya walked into the kitchen, pulling off their heavy canvas work gloves. They stopped moving entirely when they saw the glowing screen. I watched the healthy color completely drain from my son's face. He leaned heavily over the wooden table, reading the nauseating comments. His knuckles turned stark white as he gripped the edge of the wood. Maya let out a sharp, jagged breath. Her hands shook violently as she reached for her own phone to verify the nightmare. The pure, unfiltered joy they experienced in the barn yesterday was entirely gone, replaced by a sudden, suffocating rage. Maya frantically typed a fiery rebuttal on her digital keyboard. She wanted to instantly broadcast the absolute truth to the entire world. She wanted to expose the Swiss finishing school bribe, the malicious zoning complaints, and the intercepted postal mail. She wanted to publicly scream that their grandmother despised everything they stood for until it suddenly became profitable. Leo immediately agreed, demanding they release a joint press statement calling her a manipulative fraud. They were reacting exactly like normal betrayed 21-year-olds. They wanted immediate, visceral justice. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand directly over Maya's trembling fingers. I pressed down softly, forcing her to stop typing. I looked into her furious, watering eyes and shook my head slowly. I explained that reacting online was exactly the chaotic emotional trap Victoria wanted them to trigger. Engaging in a public digital screaming match would instantly reduce their profound international achievement into cheap, messy family drama. The prestigious global media would immediately stop writing about their revolutionary agricultural matrix and start publishing sensationalized gossip about a bitter rural feud. I kept my voice incredibly low and steady, anchoring them to reality. I told them that anger is a very loud emotion, but true power is entirely silent. If we argued with a narcissist in a public forum, we would automatically legitimize her false position. We would hand her the desperate attention she constantly craved. To completely eradicate her toxic presence from their brilliant legacy, we could not rely on frantic internet posts or angry comments. We had to sever the connection with absolute, undeniable surgical finality. We needed to let her build her magnificent glass house of lies as high as possible before we shattered the structural foundation. I walked over to my office desk and unlocked the heavy bottom drawer. I pulled out the dark green notebook. It was thick, heavy, and packed with a decade of undeniable concrete receipts. I placed it squarely on the kitchen table right next to the glowing laptop. I flipped open the thick cover, revealing the notarized affidavits from her wealthy friends, the intercepted postal evidence, and the printed zoning manifest. I told my children that we were no longer just building a sustainable farm. We were quietly building an airtight legal prosecution. We were going to compile the ultimate evidence package to destroy her false narrative forever. We spent the entire weekend ignoring the frantic ringing of the telephone. We did not speak to a single journalist or reply to any congratulatory messages. We sat in the warm farmhouse, sorting through years of meticulous documentation. Maya organized the digital files, pulling the encrypted audio voicemails where Victoria gleefully mocked our imminent bankruptcy. Leo cross-referenced the dates matching her sudden public philanthropy claims against the exact historical timeline of her active sabotage. I reviewed the formal legal codes binding the nonprofit organization, ensuring our corporate defenses were utterly impenetrable. We translated raw emotional pain into cold, hard, actionable data. Victoria interpreted our absolute silence as a complete cowardly surrender. Because we did not immediately fight back, she assumed she had definitively won the narrative war. Her confidence swelled into a dangerous, blinding arrogance. Narcissists always mistake quiet strategy for weakness. She began giving lengthy, exclusive television interviews, claiming she held an official advisory capacity within Roots and Resilience. She was flying dangerously close to the sun, fueled by the intoxicating praise of her wealthy peers. She believed she was completely untouchable. But her insatiable greed ultimately pushed her past the point of no return. On Sunday evening, Clara called me from her floral greenhouse. She sounded completely breathless and deeply panicked. She warned me to check the upcoming social registry for the Portland elite. I opened the digital database and found the new entry immediately. Victoria was not just stealing credit online anymore. She had officially booked the grand ballroom at the Cedar Ridge Country Club for a massive black tie gala event scheduled for next month. The printed invitations boldly advertised the gathering as the official Nobel fundraising banquet for Roots and Resilience. She was actively charging wealthy donors $10,000 a plate, claiming the money would go directly to my children's charity. She was committing massive public financial fraud using our registered trademark to enrich her own social standing. And the absolute best part was that she had unknowingly handed me the final weapon to destroy her completely. The heavy revelation of the fraudulent charity gala hung in the farmhouse kitchen like a thick, suffocating fog. We knew Victoria was charging exorbitant ticket prices, but we vastly underestimated her desperate appetite for the spotlight. Her aggressive public relations campaign did not end with a few printed invitations and curated digital photo albums. 2 days later, she escalated her profound delusion to an entirely new platform. She secured a prominent guest segment on the most popular morning television broadcast in the Pacific Northwest. It was a freezing Wednesday morning. The sky outside the kitchen window remained a bruised dark gray, threatening another heavy winter downpour. Inside the house, the air smelled of warm roasted oats and brewing black coffee. Maya, Leo, and I sat completely silent around the scarred wooden table, staring at the small flat-screen television I had carried in from the living room. The bright synthetic colors of the broadcast studio clashed violently against our muted, rustic surroundings. The television host was a polished, charismatic man who nodded enthusiastically as the camera panned to his special guest. Victoria sat perfectly poised on a plush, oversized white sofa. She wore a tailored pale lavender silk blouse, deliberately chosen to project a soft, nurturing maternal warmth she had never actually possessed. A single strand of authentic pearls rested against her collarbone, catching the harsh studio lighting. Her face was powdered to an immaculate matte finish, hiding any trace of authentic human texture. The host leaned forward, offering a sympathetic, professional smile. He asked her to describe the early days of Roots and Resilience. He wanted to know how such young minds developed the staggering discipline required to execute a global ecological breakthrough. Victoria did not flinch. She did not stumble over her fabricated script. She looked directly into the camera lens and spun a sickeningly sweet, seamless lie that made my blood run absolutely cold. She folded her manicured hands gracefully in her lap and told the viewing audience that she was the sole financial architect of their entire operation. She claimed in a soft, trembling voice that when the traditional banking institutions laughed at my children, she quietly stepped forward to provide the massive critical seed funding. She completely erased the agonizing reality of my second mortgage. She erased the terrifying day I risked my entire livelihood and the farm soil to secure their future. She casually stole my ultimate sacrifice and pinned it to her lavender silk blouse like a cheap decorative brooch. But her monumental theft did not stop with the finances. The host asked about their exceptional work ethic, and Victoria smiled a deeply modest, practiced smile. She explained that brilliance requires structure. She told a sprawling fictional story about spending countless weekends teaching them classical etiquette and strict social discipline. She claimed those rigorous parlor lessons provided the fundamental endurance they needed to survive in the harsh, remote jungles of South America. She literally credited her wealthy high society finishing school fantasies for their gritty agricultural stamina. Sitting at the kitchen table, Maya gripped her ceramic mug so fiercely I thought the thick clay might actually shatter in her hands. The hot coffee sloshed over the rim, burning her knuckles, but she did not even blink. She just stared at the glowing screen, completely paralyzed by the sheer, breathtaking scale of the deception. Then came the absolute pinnacle of her performance. The television host gently brought up the impending Nobel Youth Award ceremony scheduled for Oslo. He asked how the family planned to celebrate the monumental historic event. Victoria paused, her timing impeccably rehearsed. She slowly reached into her designer handbag and produced a pristine white tissue. She delicately dabbed the dry corner of her eye, performing a flawless imitation of a woman overcome with profound emotional gratitude. She looked back at the host and announced the fraudulent $10,000 a plate country club gala, framing it as a community celebration. Finally, she dropped the ultimate anchor into the narrative. She stated with absolute serene confidence that she was currently finalizing her European travel itinerary because she fully intended to stand right beside her little prodigies on that prestigious Norwegian stage to help them accept the global honor. The live broadcast transitioned to a cheerful commercial break for laundry detergent. The sudden blast of upbeat marketing music filled our quiet farmhouse kitchen, creating a surreal, jarring contrast to the heavy, toxic silence enveloping the room. This was no longer just a private family dispute over boundaries. This was a massive public fraud. The boulder had broken loose from the top of the mountain, and it was rolling directly toward our sanctuary. She was actively stealing their authentic narrative on live television, manipulating wealthy donors for personal prestige, and aggressively attempting to force herself onto the international stage in Oslo. Leo stood up from his wooden chair. He paced the length of the kitchen, his heavy work boots striking the floorboards with sharp, angry thuds. He turned around and looked directly at me. His jaw was clenched tight and his eyes burned with a fierce defensive fire. "Are we going to let her get away with this?" he asked, his voice tight and vibrating with raw fury. "Are we actually going to let her stand on a stage in Europe and take credit for the dirt we pulled out of the ground?" I looked at my brilliant, exhausted son. I looked at the dark green ledger sitting on the counter, completely packed with irrefutable evidence of her malicious sabotage. I felt a cold, absolute calm wash over my entire body. I did not feel fear or anxiety or even anger anymore. I felt the precise, calculating focus of a farmer watching a predator circle a baited trap. I offered my children a slow, cold, calculated smile. "No," I answered, keeping my voice perfectly flat and smooth. "We are not going to fight her on television. We are going to let her walk right through the front door of her own destruction." I picked up my mobile phone from the table. I did not draft a massive, angry paragraph exposing her lies. I did not threaten to call the news station and demand a retraction. A cornered narcissist will always find a way to deflect and play the victim if you attack them in a panic. You have to make them feel entirely victorious so they drop their defensive guards completely. I opened my messaging application and selected Victoria's contact profile. I typed out a brief, polite, and extremely specific sentence. I told her that I had just watched her wonderful morning interview and realized we urgently needed to coordinate our schedules. I requested that she come to the farm tomorrow afternoon so we could properly discuss the logistical arrangements for the upcoming trip to Oslo. I pressed the send button, watching the digital text bubble vanish into the cellular network. Maya looked over my shoulder reading the message. She frowned in deep confusion. "Why are you inviting her here?" she asked. "Why are you pretending to surrender to her demands?" I set the phone down next to the heavy ledger. I explained that Victoria currently believed she held all the leverage because she controlled the public narrative. She thought we were too intimidated by her media presence to fight back. By inviting her to discuss Oslo, I was confirming her greatest delusion. I was giving her exactly what she wanted. And when a person like my mother believes she has definitively won, she stops checking her blind spots. We were not going to Oslo with her. We were going to invite her into our sanctuary, sit her down at our table, and present her with a choice that would permanently dismantle her entire fabricated empire. The trap was perfectly set, the bait was deployed, and now all we had to do was wait for the predator to confidently walk inside. My mobile device buzzed exactly 15 seconds after I dispatched the invitation. I genuinely expected my mother to eagerly accept the opportunity to visit the agricultural sanctuary so she could gloat over her perceived total victory. However, I severely underestimated her ingrained pathological need for absolute spatial dominance. Victoria never negotiated on foreign rural territory. Her digital reply was a brief dictatorial command instructing me to meet her the following afternoon at a highly exclusive French dining establishment located in the wealthiest commercial district of downtown Portland. She explicitly stated she would absolutely not ruin her expensive imported leather shoes walking through my muddy, primitive driveway. The sudden venue alteration did not matter to me in the slightest. The physical geographic location of a snare is completely irrelevant once the arrogant predator decides to chase the bait. During my difficult, isolated childhood, my mother constantly utilized expensive dining rooms as theatrical stages for her relentless psychological warfare. She strongly preferred environments where the unspoken, rigid rules of polite high society prevented her targeted victims from raising their voices or causing a messy public scene. If she wanted to deliver a devastating personal critique, she always executed the verbal strike while sipping vintage champagne surrounded by glowing crystal chandeliers and silently hovering waiters. She expertly weaponized the strict etiquette of American wealth, ensuring her targets remained entirely paralyzed by the terrifying fear of public embarrassment. Decades later, she was confidently attempting to deploy the exact same sophisticated manipulation tactic against me. I parked my weathered, rusted truck between a sleek silver sports car and a massive black luxury sedan. I walked into the upscale restaurant wearing a simple dark wool blazer and practical denim trousers. The interior atmosphere was aggressively opulent and completely suffocating. The air smelled intensely of shaved exotic truffles, heavy floral perfume, and clarified butter. The formal maitre d' looked at my functional clothing with a brief flash of practiced disdain before guiding me silently through the crowded, bustling dining room. Victoria was already seated in a plush velvet booth positioned directly in the center of the expansive room, ensuring maximum visibility from every possible angle. She wore an immaculate, tailored emerald green suit that radiated expensive authority. A half-empty crystal flute of sparkling wine rested near her perfectly manicured fingers. She did not stand or offer a warm maternal greeting when I arrived at the table. She simply gestured toward the empty chair opposite her, offering a sharp, triumphant smile that closely resembled a razor blade hidden inside a beautiful, shiny silk ribbon. I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and my hands folded quietly in my lap. Victoria did not waste any precious time engaging in superficial polite pleasantries. She immediately reached into her oversized designer handbag and extracted a thick, cream-colored folder. She slid the heavy textured paper across the pristine white linen tablecloth, pushing it directly into my personal space. I opened the stiff cover. Inside rested a meticulously typed multi-page document. She was no longer asking for a polite, supportive seat at the family table. She was dictating the absolute, non-negotiable terms of our complete surrender. The printed document outlined a staggering list of aggressive financial and logistical demands. First, she required 5 premium VIP front-row tickets to the official Norwegian award ceremony. These exclusive seats were explicitly designated for her and 4 of her most influential wealthy country club associates. Second, she mandated that all international first-class airfare and luxury boutique hotel accommodations for her exclusive entourage be charged directly to the Roots and Resilience corporate banking accounts. The most outrageous demand, however, was printed boldly on the 3rd page of the itinerary. Victoria firmly required a guaranteed 5-minute speaking slot during the International Broadcast Gala. She explicitly intended to deliver a prepared speech representing our family legacy, effectively positioning herself as the primary visionary intellectual behind my children's entire global ecological crusade. I finished reading the typed pages and slowly looked up from the document. Victoria was leaning forward across the table, closing the physical distance between us. The artificial maternal warmth she displayed on live television the previous morning was entirely gone. Her eyes were flat, cold, and utterly merciless. She dropped her voice into a sharp, venomous whisper designed to cut through the ambient noise of the clinking silverware and murmuring wealthy patrons. She told me that I would approve the massive corporate expenses and secure the prestigious speaking slot immediately. If I refused her generous terms, she possessed a secondary backup plan perfectly calibrated to destroy everything my children had built. She smiled a terrifying, genuine smile. She carefully explained that she now held direct access to powerful, influential journalists across the entire Pacific Northwest. If I denied her the Norwegian stage, she would immediately contact her new media allies. She would launch a devastating, coordinated public relations smear campaign accusing my children of severe financial mismanagement. She threatened to fabricate a compelling, tragic narrative claiming Maya and Leo were ungrateful, arrogant youths illegally misappropriating donor funds for their own selfish personal enrichment. She promised to engineer a massive federal tax scandal right before the global award ceremony, guaranteeing the Norwegian committee would permanently retract the honor to avoid the toxic international controversy. The sheer magnitude of her threat hung heavily in the air, mingling with the scent of roasted garlic and expensive red wine. She was actively attempting to extort a registered charitable organization. She was crossing the definitive line from toxic family dynamics directly into the realm of severe corporate criminality. Any normal parent would have shattered the delicate crystal wine glass against the hard table. A normal mother would have screamed, cried, or desperately defended the profound moral integrity of her children. I did absolutely none of those predictable emotional things. I maintained a solid wall of impenetrable stoicism. I did not shed a single tear or utter a single word of defensive protest. I looked directly into her cold, arrogant eyes, absorbing the full weight of her malice without flinching. I reached down and picked up the printed extortion itinerary. I smoothed the paper edges with quiet, deliberate precision. I folded the cream-colored document neatly into perfect thirds and placed it securely inside my worn leather purse. I offered a single slow nod of acknowledgement. I stood up from the velvet booth, leaving my tall glass of iced water completely untouched. I told her softly that I would take her comprehensive requests under immediate advisement, and then I turned around and walked out of the bustling restaurant without looking back. Victoria remained seated, bathing in the warm, glowing satisfaction of her perceived ultimate victory. She genuinely believed she had crushed my spirit and successfully hijacked the greatest achievement of our entire lives. She completely underestimated the quiet, observant daughter she had systematically belittled and ignored for 40 brutal years. As I walked onto the cold concrete pavement of the downtown street, my pulse was perfectly steady and my mind was incredibly sharp. By sliding that typed itinerary across the table, she had unknowingly provided the final, crucial piece of physical evidence required to execute her total, permanent destruction. Attempted financial extortion of a federally recognized nonprofit charity is a severe felony under strict American corporate law. Threatening to fabricate fraudulent tax claims to manipulate a global organization crosses multiple domestic and international legal boundaries. I pulled my mobile phone from my jacket pocket and dialed a highly secure private number. I was not calling the farm to cry to my children or complain about my mother. I was calling a notoriously aggressive corporate litigation attorney employed at the most ruthless law firm in Seattle. The trap was officially locked, the extensive evidence was fully secured, and the final, devastating takedown was completely authorized. Before exiting the opulent French dining establishment, I paused at the edge of the plush velvet booth. The ambient noise of clinking crystal and hushed wealthy conversations faded into a dull background drone. I looked down at the woman who had spent 4 decades meticulously attempting to erase my authentic identity. I met her cold, calculating gaze with perfect, unwavering clarity. "I understand, Mother. I said, keeping my vocal register perfectly smooth and entirely devoid of any defensive panic. "I will ensure you receive a highly specific special package containing everything you require for the upcoming ceremony. It will arrive by private courier on Thursday afternoon." Victoria leaned back against the expensive upholstery. A deep, satisfied smirk spread across her powdered face. It was the distinct, arrogant expression of a seasoned predator observing a captured prize. She genuinely assumed she had successfully bullied me into total submission one final time. She believed the printed extortion itinerary had effectively crushed my resistance. She reached for her sparkling wine, utterly confident her luxurious Norwegian triumph was officially secured. I turned and walked out the heavy glass doors, stepping into the frigid downtown Portland air. The drive back to the rural valley felt completely different than the anxious journey into the city. My hands gripped the steering wheel with relaxed, steady purpose. When I parked the heavy-weathered truck near the main barn, the afternoon sky had fractured, revealing cold, bright rays of winter sunlight. Maya and Leo were waiting for me inside the farmhouse kitchen. They were not alone. Sitting beside them at the scarred wooden table was Sarah. Sarah served as the primary legal and public relations liaison for Roots and Resilience. We had been close, trusted friends since our undergraduate years at the State University. Sarah possessed a formidable, brilliant mind. She originally built her fierce professional reputation during the late 90s, aggressively defending regional environmental coalitions against massive predatory timber conglomerates. She possessed a rare, unique ability to navigate dirty rural battlegrounds and sterile corporate courtrooms with equal lethal precision. She wore practical tailored slacks and sensible flat shoes, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable competence. I placed the dark green ledger directly in the center of the table. I unclasped the heavy leather binding, opening the secure vault of documented history. We systematically reviewed the extensive, undeniable evidence. Maya pulled out the printed email threads where Victoria actively attempted to influence wealthy conservative donors to completely defund our initial pilot programs. Leo organized the stack of malicious municipal zoning complaints, each one bearing the official signatures of my mother's closest country club associates. Sarah methodically traced the complex financial timelines. She cross-referenced Victoria's recent public philanthropic claims against the certified historical bank records I provided. The official municipal ledgers definitively proved my mother never contributed a single solitary cent to the organization. The legal documents clearly illustrated the terrifying second mortgage I secured against the farmland, serving as the sole foundational capital that launched their entire global enterprise. Then I reached into my purse and retrieved the folded, cream-colored itinerary. I smoothed the thick, textured paper flat against the wood. Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed reading glasses, leaning forward to inspect the typed demands. She read the bold requirements for VIP Norwegian event tickets, first-class international airfare, and the mandatory 5-minute global broadcasting slot. She noted the explicit threat regarding the fabricated tax fraud allegations meant to destroy the twins right before the award ceremony. Sarah looked up, a sharp, brilliant gleam illuminating her eyes. She tapped her index finger firmly against the typed paper. "This specific document is the absolute final nail in her manufactured coffin," Sarah declared, her voice radiating cold professional certainty. "What your mother committed here is not merely aggressive social posturing. By formally demanding luxury accommodations and broadcasting access while actively threatening to fabricate catastrophic financial ruin against a registered federal charity, she crossed directly into documented criminal extortion." We did not need to scream or engage in a messy digital shouting match. Sarah confirmed we held the ultimate strategic high ground. We collectively decided we were not just going to simply deny her access to the international stage. A basic rejection would only fuel her fabricated victim narrative, allowing her to play the martyr to her wealthy friends. We needed to permanently humiliate her using the exact rigid, polite rules of high society etiquette she worshipped. We would deliver a message so profoundly undeniable and perfectly tailored that she could never publicly complain without exposing her own elaborate, fraudulent lies. The execution required a profound physical symbol. Early the following morning, I drove back toward the urban city limits, but I avoided the wealthy downtown district entirely. I navigated toward a quiet, dusty antique dealership tucked away in a forgotten historical neighborhood. The old merchant specialized in rare European estate items. I walked through the narrow, crowded aisles, breathing in the scent of aged beeswax and old paper. I found exactly what the strategy required, resting inside a locked glass display case. It was a stunning rectangular box, crafted from solid, heavy mahogany. The dense, dark wood was polished to a brilliant glass-like finish, reflecting the warm ambient lighting. The lid secured tightly shut with a delicate, ornate brass clasp. When the merchant opened the container, the interior revealed a thick lining of crushed crimson velvet. It was exactly the type of expensive, luxurious vessel traditionally used by wealthy aristocratic families to present priceless inherited jewelry or historic diamond necklaces. I purchased the antique case, paying with crisp cash, and carried it carefully back to my vehicle. Upon returning to the farm, I did not take the elegant mahogany container into the house. I walked directly past the barn and hiked up the steep eastern ridge bordering our property line. The winter wind whipped fiercely across the open pasture, biting at my exposed cheeks. I climbed until I reached the highest elevation on the land, a quiet, secluded clearing where the massive, jagged peak of Mount Hood dominated the entire northern horizon. This specific patch of ground represented the very first acre we successfully regenerated using my children's experimental biological matrix. I knelt on the cold, damp earth. I unlatched the brass clasp and opened the beautiful antique box. The crimson velvet looked shockingly bright against the muted gray winter landscape. I reached down with my bare hands and dug my fingers deep into the ground. I bypassed the frosty surface layer, plunging into the warm, living core below. The soil here was incredibly dark, rich, and heavily textured. It smelled powerfully of ancient minerals, deep, heavy rain, and fierce, stubborn life. I carefully harvested a dense, compacted mound of the fertile dirt. I placed the wet, heavy soil directly onto the pristine, crushed velvet lining. I packed the dark earth tightly into the corners, ensuring it filled the entire interior volume. The wet mud instantly stained the expensive crimson fabric, ruining the delicate material forever. The contrast was absolutely magnificent. The wealthy, polished exterior of the mahogany case contained the raw, unfiltered, muddy essence of authentic rural labor. I closed the heavy wooden lid, sealing the earth inside. I locked the delicate brass latch with a satisfying, definitive click. I wiped my filthy hands on my denim trousers, feeling an immense, profound sense of closure. Victoria demanded a prestigious package befitting her elite social stature. She demanded a tangible symbol of her fundamental connection to roots and resilience. I was going to deliver exactly what she requested. I carried the heavy, loaded box back down the rugged trail, preparing to send my mother the definitive, irrefutable truth she had spent her entire privileged life desperately trying to avoid. The upcoming Thursday morning delivery would not contain glossy VIP tickets or printed first-class airline itineraries. It would contain the ultimate, silent, devastating judgment. When she opened that elegant container in her pristine white living room, surrounded by her expensive imported rugs and delicate crystal, she would find nothing but the raw, undeniable dirt she so violently despised. And she would instantly realize, with complete, terrifying clarity, that the quiet, isolated daughter she chronically underestimated had just systematically engineered her total, permanent social annihilation. Thursday arrived, bringing a brilliant, blinding winter sun that reflected sharply off the frozen Oregon fields. My mother spent the entire week meticulously orchestrating her grand departure. She rented the primary dining hall at the Cedar Ridge Country Club, hosting a lavish bon voyage luncheon for 30 of the wealthiest, most influential women in Portland. She wanted a captive audience to witness her ultimate triumph. She required them to see the physical manifestation of her fabricated legacy arriving via special courier. She instructed the catering staff to serve imported caviar, delicate artisan salads, and vintage champagne, ensuring the atmosphere matched her inflated sense of supreme global importance. During my adolescence, Victoria always believed power was something you displayed rather than something you simply possessed. She would constantly host elaborate dinner parties specifically to parade her latest expensive acquisitions before her jealous peers. She used material objects as weapons to establish dominance over everyone around her. She assumed the Norwegian tickets would serve as her crowning jewel, cementing her status as the absolute matriarch of Pacific Northwest high society. She completely failed to understand that true power operates in absolute silence. I raised Maya and Leo with an entirely different philosophy regarding human value. We believed that authentic strength is forged in quiet, unseen moments of grueling labor. We never sought external validation from crowds or relied on expensive garments to project authority. The children learned to measure their self-worth by the health of the soil they cultivated and the lives they managed to improve. This fundamental ideological division between our farm and my mother's elite social circle set the perfect stage for the devastating collision about to occur inside that opulent dining room. We did not hire a random anonymous delivery service to transport the mahogany container. Maya specifically requested that Marcus perform the critical task. Marcus served as the lead agricultural foreman for Roots and Resilience. He was a towering, quiet man who spent his days driving heavy diesel tractors and repairing complex irrigation systems. He understood the profound gravity of our mission perfectly. For this specific occasion, Marcus traded his stained canvas overalls for a tailored charcoal wool suit. He looked incredibly imposing, possessing the rugged, undeniable dignity of a man who actually works the land for a living. His massive, calloused hands provided a stark, beautiful contrast to the polished, delicate antique box he carried. Marcus drove his spotless pickup truck past the gated security entrance of the affluent club. He parked between rows of imported luxury sedans and sleek European sports cars. He carried the heavy polished wooden case securely under his right arm. He walked through the massive double doors of the main clubhouse, ignoring the confused stares of the uniformed valet staff. He moved with deliberate, measured purpose across the expensive patterned carpets. He entered the primary dining hall just as the waitstaff began pouring the second round of expensive sparkling wine. The room was a vibrant sea of pastel silk cashmere and sparkling diamond jewelry. Victoria sat precisely at the head table, positioned like a reigning monarch, holding court over her loyal subjects. She was actively bragging about her impending European travel itinerary, detailing the exclusive boutiques she planned to visit in Oslo. She was mid-sentence when Marcus approached her chair. He did not introduce himself or offer a polite, deferential bow. He simply placed the exquisite antique mahogany box directly onto the crisp white linen tablecloth, resting it right next to her half-empty crystal champagne flute. The heavy wood made a solid, authoritative thud against the table, silencing the entire room immediately. Marcus looked down at my mother and delivered the precise message I scripted. He stated the package contained the exclusive materials requested for the Oslo ceremony, sent directly from the founders of the organization. He kept his voice low, steady, and completely devoid of any subservient tone. He then turned around and walked out of the opulent room, leaving an absolute deafening silence in his wake. His heavy footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor, marking the final seconds of my mother's carefully constructed charade. Every single eye in the dining hall instantly locked onto the stunning wooden container. The affluent women leaned forward in their plush chairs, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. They fully expected to see gleaming golden passes stamped with international insignias or perhaps a priceless piece of commemorative jewelry designed to honor the occasion. Victoria offered her guests a smug, knowing smile. She reached forward with her perfectly manicured fingers. Her nails were painted a flawless, pristine white. She gracefully unfastened the delicate brass clasp and confidently threw open the heavy wooden lid, expecting to reveal her ultimate social victory. The profound scent of the Oregon wilderness immediately exploded into the sterile, artificially climate-controlled room. It was not a subtle or pleasant fragrance. It was the aggressive, heavy odor of damp forest floor, decaying pine needles, and ancient wet earth. The harsh smell completely overpowered the delicate floral perfumes worn by the assembled elite. The women sitting closest to the head table physically recoiled, pressing delicate linen napkins against their noses, attempting to block the overwhelming stench of raw, unfiltered reality. Victoria stared into the box, completely paralyzed by sudden, incomprehensible shock. Her pristine white fingertips were resting directly in the cold, wet mud I harvested from the mountain ridge. The dark sludge instantly stained her expensive manicure, seeping into her cuticles and ruining the flawless polish. The deep crimson velvet interior was completely destroyed, soaked through with the dense, heavy dirt. The magnificent antique case, intended for priceless diamonds, now held nothing but the gritty, ugly foundation of our rural existence. Resting perfectly centered on top of the packed soil was a single, heavy stock card made of thick, expensive parchment. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly how the printed words felt hitting the stagnant air. The message was printed in crisp, bold, black ink. It read to Mother, "Since you publicly claim to have built our entire foundation from the absolute ground up, we thought you should finally possess the only thing of ours you ever truly despised, the dirt. Enjoy the television broadcast. We will not be needing your legacy." A collective sharp gasp echoed across the vast dining room. 30 influential women stared in absolute stunning horror at the filthy box and the ruined velvet. The magnificent illusion of the supportive, benevolent matriarch shattered instantly, breaking into 1,000 irreparable pieces right in front of her most important peers. Victoria could not blame a postal error or a misunderstood communication. The extreme deliberate nature of the delivery sent a crystal-clear, irrefutable message to everyone in the room. Her daughter and grandchildren fundamentally rejected her entire existence, leaving her publicly exposed as a complete fraud. The absolute public humiliation was incredibly thorough, but a cornered narcissist does not simply apologize and gracefully fade away. As the initial shock wore off, the terrified silence in the country club transformed into frantic, vicious whispering. The elite women began murmuring among themselves, their eyes darting rapidly between the muddy box and my mother's pale, frozen face. Victoria slammed the wooden lid shut, spraying small droplets of dark mud across her pale silk blouse. Her face flushed a dangerous, vibrant shade of deep purple. She realized her grand social facade was permanently destroyed within her exclusive circle, but she still retained control over the massive, fraudulent charity gala scheduled for the following week. She had already collected hundreds of thousands of dollars from the wealthy donors sitting in that very room. Instead of retreating and accepting her defeat, she decided to violently double down on her destructive path. She pulled a pristine embroidered handkerchief from her purse, wiping the thick mud from her trembling fingers. She grabbed her mobile phone and dialed the local media station, preparing to execute her catastrophic smear campaign against my children. She was fully willing to burn her entire world to the ground, utilizing federal tax fraud allegations and malicious lies, as long as we perished in the flames alongside her. The historic Benson Hotel, located deep within the bustling commercial district of downtown Portland, provided the exact formal environment we required for our final domestic press event. We reserved the grand ballroom, featuring towering vaulted ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers, and rich mahogany wall paneling. This elegant space usually hosted wealthy political fundraisers and elite corporate galas. Today it served as the designated staging ground for my children to officially address the regional media before our impending international flight to Norway. The room buzzed with chaotic electric energy. Over 50 credentialed journalists, local news anchors, and independent documentary filmmakers crowded into the seating area, adjusting heavy camera lenses and testing sensitive audio equipment. Maya and Leo sat comfortably behind a long draped table positioned on the slightly elevated main stage. They wore clean-pressed professional attire, exchanging their usual muddy canvas workwear for sharp dark blazers and crisp collared shirts. They looked incredibly composed, radiating the quiet, undeniable confidence of young, brilliant leaders, fully prepared to inherit the global spotlight. I stood silently near the heavy velvet curtains draped along the right side of the stage, watching them answer complex scientific inquiries regarding their biological soil matrix. I held a large, heavy leather satchel tightly against my side. The thick bag contained 50 identically bound black folders. Each dossier represented a masterclass in forensic accounting and legal preservation meticulously compiled by our brilliant attorney Sarah over the past 72 hours. The organized professional atmosphere shattered precisely 45 minutes into the scheduled broadcast. The massive double oak doors situated at the rear of the ballroom swung open with extreme violent force, hitting the brass wall stops with a deafening crack. The sudden sharp noise instantly silenced the murmuring crowd. Every single camera operator instinctively pivoted their heavy equipment toward the dramatic entrance. My mother stepped through the grand threshold. Victoria looked entirely different from the polished, arrogant socialite who had confidently ordered expensive champagne at the country club just 3 days prior. Her usually flawless silver hair appeared deliberately disheveled. She wore a simple, understated dark gray dress, lacking her signature diamond accessories. Her pale face was completely devoid of makeup, highlighting deep, dark circles beneath her frantic eyes. She had expertly crafted the ultimate visual manifestation of a heartbroken, betrayed elderly woman. She marched straight down the center aisle, completely ignoring the confused security personnel attempting to block her path. She was executing her final desperate countermeasure, intent on hijacking the live feed to burn our entire organization to the ground. She reached the front row of the press pool, clutching a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. She did not wait for a journalist to ask a question. She unleashed a loud, ragged sob that echoed perfectly off the vaulted ceilings. She pointed a shaking, fragile finger directly at my children sitting on the stage. "Those young people are absolute frauds," my mother wailed, her voice projecting with practiced theatrical volume. "They are standing up there accepting global accolades while committing horrific financial crimes against their own family. I gave them everything. I sacrificed my entire personal fortune to build that agricultural charity from nothing, and the moment they achieved international wealth, they forcefully abandoned me. They are currently misappropriating thousands of charitable donor dollars to fund their lavish European vacations while leaving me completely destitute. They are ruthless, ungrateful abusers." The media pool instantly erupted into total pandemonium. Reporters shouted overlapping questions, frantically waving digital audio recorders toward the weeping woman. Camera flashes exploded in a blinding rapid sequence, capturing every single agonizing tear rolling down her cheeks. This was the exact, scandalous, catastrophic public relations nightmare she had promised to deliver. She was attempting to execute a perfect character assassination on live television, relying entirely on the journalists' innate hunger for dramatic, tragic conflict. My children did not panic. Maya merely leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, while Leo maintained a completely neutral, passive expression. They had been thoroughly briefed regarding this exact, specific contingency. I stepped out from the dark shadows of the velvet curtains and walked calmly toward the frantic, chaotic press pool. I did not yell over the shouting reporters. I did not angrily command the security guards to physically remove the intruder. I simply unbuckled the brass straps of my heavy leather satchel and pulled out the first thick stack of bound black folders. Sarah suddenly appeared beside me carrying a matching heavy box. Together, we moved methodically through the front row, handing the dense documents directly to the most prominent investigative journalists in the room. The reporters instinctively grabbed the heavy dossiers, their professional curiosity instantly overriding the dramatic spectacle occurring in the center aisle. For those distinguished members of the press who are genuinely interested in reporting the actual, verifiable financial history of Roots and Resilience, I announced, my voice projecting with calm, chilling clarity, please examine the provided materials. We value absolute transparency above all else. The chaotic shouting began to slowly extinguish as the journalists flipped open the stiff black covers. The ballroom grew incredibly quiet, replaced entirely by the rustling sound of heavy paper turning. The dossiers were not filled with emotional arguments or petty family grievances. They contained cold, irrefutable, authenticated receipts. The very first page displayed the official municipal property deed proving my catastrophic second farm mortgage served as the sole primary funding source for the initial nonprofit pilot program. The subsequent section contained certified banking records definitively demonstrating my mother had never transferred a single monetary cent to our organization during its entire operational history. The third chapter featured copies of the malicious zoning board complaints bearing her verified, authentic signature, documenting her extensive multi-year campaign to bankrupt our rural sanctuary. But the absolute final, devastating blow was located at the very back of the folder. We had included high-resolution printed copies of her recent digital text messages, explicitly demanding luxury first-class airfare and exclusive broadcasting rights. Directly beneath those messages, we attached the typed extortion itinerary she had boldly handed me at the upscale French restaurant. Sarah had even drafted a formal preliminary legal injunction outlining the severe federal felony charges related to attempting to extort a registered charitable foundation using fabricated tax fraud allegations. I watched the senior political correspondent for the Regional Chronicle read the extortion itinerary. His eyes widened significantly. He looked up from the document and stared directly at my weeping mother. His expression morphed from sympathetic concern to profound, disgusted realization. The truth was spreading rapidly through the crowd like a heavy, undeniable wave. One by one, the journalists lowered their audio recorders and stopped taking photographs of her theatrical tears. The flashing lights ceased entirely. The journalists realized they were not documenting a tragic victim of elder abuse. They were actively observing a desperate, manipulative criminal attempting to execute a massive public fraud. Victoria slowly stopped crying. The deafening silence in the grand ballroom felt infinitely heavier than the previous chaotic shouting. She looked around the room, watching the powerful media figures holding the black folders. She saw the undeniable physical evidence of her lifelong cruelty duplicated 50 times over and distributed to the exact people she intended to use as weapons. Her grand master plan completely collapsed, dissolving into absolute permanent ruin. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. The false narrative she had spent decades meticulously cultivating was dead, entirely destroyed by the very same public spotlight she had desperately craved. She looked directly at me, standing calmly near the edge of the stage, holding the empty leather satchel. She did not find a frightened, intimidated daughter cowering in the shadows. She found a formidable, immovable wall of concrete truth. A young, aggressive reporter from a prominent national news syndicate suddenly stood up, waving the extortion itinerary in the air. "Ma'am," he shouted, his voice echoing sharply across the silent room, "can you please explain why you explicitly threatened to fabricate a federal tax scandal if your grandchildren refused to purchase you a first-class ticket to Norway?" Victoria physically recoiled as if she had been violently struck. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice completely failed her. There was absolutely no clever lie, no sophisticated manipulation, and no charming social grace capable of erasing the signed, authenticated documents currently resting in their hands. The impenetrable armor of her high society elite status shattered into microscopic, irreparable fragments. She turned around and fled. She practically ran down the long center aisle, pushing frantically past the heavy oak doors and disappearing into the bustling hotel lobby. She left behind her remaining dignity, her public reputation, and any lingering illusion of maternal connection. The journalists did not follow her. They immediately pivoted their cameras back toward the stage, entirely focused on the massive, undeniable scandal documented in the black folders. We had successfully amputated the toxic infection from our family tree with clean, surgical precision. However, the sheer magnitude of the public exposure triggered a dangerous secondary chain reaction. As the press conference concluded and we packed our belongings for the airport, Sarah received an urgent encrypted phone call. The local district attorney had watched the live television broadcast and read the digital copies of the extortion dossier published online by the reporters. While we were finally free to board our international flight to accept the Nobel Prize, the legal authorities were rapidly mobilizing to formally investigate the massive, fraudulent fundraising gala Victoria had organized at the country club. The battle for our reputation was officially won, but the devastating legal fallout of my mother's breathtaking greed was just beginning to drag her wealthy associates into a massive criminal conspiracy. The transatlantic flight to Northern Europe provided the first genuine moment of uninterrupted quiet we had experienced in months. High above the heavy winter storm clouds of the Pacific Northwest, the cabin of the commercial airliner hummed with a soothing, steady vibration. Maya and Leo slept soundly in the adjacent seats, exhausted by the emotional adrenaline of the press conference and the sheer physical toll of their relentless agricultural labor. I remained completely awake, staring out the small acrylic window at the endless expanse of dark oceanic water below. The frantic, chaotic energy of my mother's desperate public collapse felt millions of miles away. We were finally leaving the toxic battlefield behind and stepping into the pure, unadulterated light of their actual achievement. The biting cold air of Oslo greeted us upon arrival, carrying a crisp, absolute clarity that perfectly matched the gravity of the impending week. The Norwegian capital was a breathtaking blend of ancient historic architecture and sleek modern efficiency, entirely devoid of the pretentious social posturing that plagued our former life in the city. We spent the days leading up to the ceremony, walking through the quiet, snow-covered streets, breathing in the freezing clean air, and marveling at the profound reality of our incredible journey. The official venue for the Nobel Peace Prize Youth Award possessed a staggering architectural majesty. The grand municipal hall featured towering columns of pale polished stone, massive arched windows, and intricate golden mosaics that reflected the bright cascading lights of the international broadcasting crews. The vast auditorium was completely filled with global dignitaries, brilliant scientific minds, and actual members of the Norwegian royal family. I sat directly in the center of the plush front row, wearing a simple, elegant navy gown. My hands rested quietly in my lap, completely free of the heavy leather satchel and the dark green ledger. The defensive armor was permanently retired. The heavy burden of endless documentation was completely lifted from my shoulders. When the prominent committee chairman formally announced Roots and Resilience, the massive symphony orchestra played a sweeping, triumphant overture. Maya and Leo walked onto the magnificent global stage. They did not appear intimidated by the overwhelming aristocratic grandeur surrounding them. They moved with the identical, steady, grounded rhythm they utilized when walking across our uneven grazing pastures. They wore tailored formal attire, but they completely lacked the stiff, unnatural pretension my mother always tried to force upon them. They radiated a profound, raw authenticity that instantly captivated the entire room. When Leo approached the heavy wooden podium, he did not deliver a hollow, rehearsed speech about elite philanthropy or wealthy altruism. He spoke passionately about the microscopic living organisms thriving in the deep soil. He spoke about the desperate, vital necessity of protecting our fragile global ecosystem through grueling, unglamorous physical dedication. Maya stood beside her brother, offering a brilliant, unscripted smile that illuminated the entire cavernous auditorium. She eloquently explained how resilient life always finds a way to flourish, even in the most hostile, barren environments. They were entirely unburdened by the shallow expectations of high society. They belonged entirely to the earth, and the world was finally pausing in absolute silence to listen to their profound wisdom. The applause that followed their presentation was not the polite golf clap of a country club luncheon. It was a massive, thunderous standing ovation that literally shook the ancient stone foundation of the building. Watching my remarkable children hold those heavy, gleaming gold medals, I felt a profound, overwhelming wave of absolute peace wash over my entire soul. The journey leading to this exact, breathtaking pinnacle was brutally steep and endlessly riddled with malicious obstacles. I thought about the terrifying afternoon in the stale-smelling bank lobby when I mortgaged our organic sanctuary to fund their visionary dreams. I remembered the freezing winter rain soaking entirely through my heavy canvas coat while I repaired broken irrigation pipes in the dark just to keep the small operation afloat. I recalled the countless, agonizing nights spent aggressively shielding their developing minds from the corrosive, toxic influence of my mother's sterile parlor rooms. Every single grueling sacrifice, every blistered hand, and every silent, agonizing tear shed in the dark farmhouse kitchen suddenly crystallized into this magnificent, undeniable victory. I had waged a massive quiet war for their sovereign independence. I fought against financial ruin, municipal sabotage, and emotional manipulation. Standing in that majestic European hall, observing their brilliant global triumph, I knew with absolute flawless certainty that I had definitively won the only battle that ever truly mattered. While we celebrated our joyous international milestone, the inevitable catastrophic fallout for Victoria swept through Portland with swift, brutal efficiency. Her total permanent destruction did not arrive with a loud, dramatic explosion. It manifested as a chilling, suffocating silence. The local district attorney swiftly launched a formal, comprehensive investigation into her fraudulent country club gala. Law enforcement officials officially froze her corporate banking assets and subpoenaed her extensive digital communications, directly exposing her massive criminal tax conspiracy to the federal authorities. The wealthy elite women who previously praised her visionary leadership immediately severed all social ties, desperately attempting to distance their own families from the toxic legal fallout. Her exclusive club memberships were quietly but permanently revoked. The prominent regional media outlets that had eagerly platformed her fabricated lies broadcasted lengthy formal retractions, wiping her false philanthropic claims from the historical digital record entirely. Victoria retreated into the dark, isolated confines of her pristine, empty mansion. The landline telephone that once rang constantly with invitations to elite galas now remained completely silent. She was totally stripped of her powerful social network, her stolen prestige, and her manufactured legacy. She was ultimately left with absolutely nothing but the bitter, decaying remnants of her own spectacular vanity. The arrogant woman who aggressively worshipped loud, superficial attention was finally permanently condemned to a life of complete, absolute obscurity. True prestigious legacy is never found inside a velvet-lined jewelry box or casually purchased with a massive inherited trust fund. It absolutely cannot be faked in a wealthy parlor room, fabricated for a glossy magazine cover, or stolen during a weeping television interview. Genuine lasting power is grown slowly and resiliently in the wild, unpredictable elements. It requires the immense, fierce courage to completely reject the comfortable, sterile lies of polite society and fully embrace the difficult, messy reality of authentic labor. We built a revolutionary global empire not by climbing the fragile, manipulative social ladder, but by proudly digging our calloused hands deeply into the forgotten, fractured earth. For those of you listening who are quietly battling your own toxic manipulators, I offer this final, profound truth. Do not ever engage their frantic, chaotic hysteria. Maintain your stoic, absolute calm in the face of their aggressive provocations. Document every single malicious violation, compile the irrefutable hard evidence, and patiently wait for the arrogant predator to walk confidently into their own perfectly designed trap. Protect the brilliant, boundless potential of your children with every single ounce of your fierce maternal strength. Shield them from the shallow, synthetic expectations of those broken individuals who value superficial status above genuine moral character. Teach your family the profound, vital importance of honest, unglamorous work. Never be afraid to let them step outside the pristine, suffocating boundaries of polite society. Never be afraid to let them get a little muddy, because sometimes the dirt is exactly where you find the gold. The story of Hazel Maya Leo and the devastating downfall of Victoria is far more than a triumphant tale of a family farm overcoming high society sabotage. It is a mirror held directly up to the American soul. When I reflect on the journey from a heavily mortgaged plot of rural Oregon land to the global stage in Oslo, I realize that the most profound victories are rarely loud. They are cultivated in the quiet, damp dark of our own perseverance. As a society, we have become dangerously intoxicated by the illusion of success, the glossy magazine covers, the meticulously curated digital profiles, and the hollow applause of people who do not actually know us. Yet true legacy is never found in the pristine, sterile corridors of high society. It is always found in the dirt. Through this saga of quiet stoicism and calculated justice, we unearth vital lessons about who we are and who we are raising our children to become. The message to American parents: foundations of truth. In an era where modern American parenting is often measured by superficial milestones and outsourced to digital validation, this narrative serves as a vital grounding course correction. The message to parents is stark and uncompromising. True family responsibility requires a foundation built on radical honesty, fairness, and profound emotional awareness. We often mistake traditional family structure for a rigid adherence to aesthetic norms, perfectly set dining tables, polite country club dinners, and a flawless public image. Victoria represented this hollow imitation of tradition. She believed that prestige could be bought and that a family's worth was dictated by the zip code they inhabited. But authentic traditional family values are not about how your family looks to the outside world. They are about how your family functions in the dark. Hazel demonstrates that the ultimate parental responsibility is to serve as an emotional anchor. When Victoria unleashed her media blitz, the twins' natural instinct was to fight back with digital rage. Hazel stopped them. She taught them emotional awareness by modeling it. She proved that you do not protect your children by shielding them from every hardship. You protect them by teaching them how to process betrayal with clarity rather than chaos. American parents must realize that fairness is not just about treating your children equally. It is about holding the adults in their lives accountable. We must teach our children that their worth is not dependent on the conditional approval of toxic elders, but on the undeniable evidence of their own hard work. The mandate for the next generation: embrace the mud. What does Hazel impart to Maya and Leo, and by extension to all young people navigating this chaotic modern culture? She offers a powerful mandate: abandon the desperate pursuit of overnight influence and embrace the unglamorous reality of the mud. Authenticity over aesthetics. Young people today are bombarded with the toxic lie that if an achievement is not publicly broadcasted and instantly validated, it does not matter. The twins changed the world because they were willing to work in isolation. They learned that the most vital ecosystems grow underground, far away from the flashing cameras. The weight of real work. The greatest defense against a world that tries to steal your narrative is the undeniable weight of your own competence. You cannot inherit true grit. You cannot fake the calluses on your hands or the brilliance in your mind. Hazel teaches the youth that they owe absolutely nothing to a society that demands their conformity. If you want to build a life that cannot be hijacked by manipulators, you must build it with materials they are too afraid to touch. You must be willing to endure the freezing rain, the grueling hours, and the heavy lifting. When you possess actual substance, the desperate illusions of the people who try to control you will naturally shatter against your immovable truth. A spiritual practitioner's observation: the alchemy of cultivation. If we step back and observe the current state of American society through the lens of a spiritual practitioner, this story transforms into a profound allegory for self-cultivation. We live in a deeply fractured society where ego, greed, and the desperate hunger for external validation have fundamentally separated us from our spiritual center. Victoria is the ultimate manifestation of the uncultivated ego. She is a hungry ghost perpetually starving for a status she did not earn, completely disconnected from wisdom and morality. She operates from a place of severe spiritual sickness, believing that manipulation and extortion can fill the agonizing void in her soul. Modern society produces millions of Victorias, individuals who mistake dominance for strength and visibility for virtue. Conversely, Hazel's journey is a masterclass in spiritual resilience and mindful detachment. She does not react to her mother's provocations with uncontrolled anger because she has cultivated immense inner peace. To achieve a better life, a spiritual practitioner knows that one must practice non-attachment to the chaotic actions of others. Hazel uses the ledger, a symbol of objective truth, to observe reality without being consumed by it. To American parents seeking a higher path, the spiritual message is clear: self-cultivation is the only way to break generational curses. You must develop the wisdom to recognize toxic illusions, the morality to refuse participation in them, and the resilience to stand completely alone if necessary. When you anchor your spirit to the truth, you become entirely immune to the extortion of the ego. You become a sanctuary for yourself and your children, a place where genuine life can finally take root. The sovereign path forward. If the quiet stoic triumph of this narrative resonates with the silent battles you are fighting in your own life, I invite you to join our growing community. Please follow Sophia Vengeance for more stories that celebrate calculated justice, emotional resilience, and the unyielding power of the truth. We are building a space for those who refuse to surrender their authenticity to the loudest voices in the room. As we reflect on the mahogany box filled with damp, heavy earth, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about American family dynamics. Conventional societal wisdom preaches a gospel of endless forgiveness. We are told that family is everything, that blood demands unconditional loyalty, and that it is always the noble choice to build bridges, compromise, and keep the peace at the holiday table. But there is a far more vital, unconventional truth that we must finally accept if we are ever going to truly heal. Some bridges are built specifically to let the enemy into your sanctuary, and the most loving traditional thing a parent can do is burn them to the ground. Blood does not automatically grant someone a permanent visa into your life. True morality sometimes requires the absolute excommunication of toxic elders to protect the innocent young. We are taught to fear being the villain in someone else's fabricated story, but perhaps true enlightenment is realizing that the villain in a narcissist story is simply the hero who finally locked the door. Look closely at the table you have set in your own life. Who is sitting in your dining room? Are you serving those who cultivate your soil, or are you desperately pouring expensive wine for those who only wish to salt your earth? The choice of who gets to hold your legacy is entirely yours. Just remember, when the cameras finally stop flashing and the grand illusions inevitably fade into the dark, the only thing that will ever remain is the dirt. Ensure it is yours.